Chapter 41. Chapter 40. First, Dio was attacked by alien ships, then he got into a battle with the young heroes, and finally, he came to the enemy's mothership secretly and had his first kiss there. Superman saved him just as he was about to give his life to destroy the ship, which would have killed thousands of people. It was a great day the whole time these things happened. After Superman saved them and lifted the huge ship, which must have weighed millions of tons, above a city he couldn't see from the front of the ship, he carried them out of the city slowly and dropped them down gently in a desert. So, who's going to open the door for him? Kid Flash asked and looked at Superman, who was floating in front of them with his arms crossed over his chest and a smile on his face. The Superman in this reality closely resembles the one from current comic books. A strong man with a sharp jaw, smooth dark hair, and blue eyes. The suit had an old-fashioned texture, with a full blue suit, red trunks with a yellow belt, a large red S on a yellow logo on his chest, and a long flowing red cape. Dio's heart was racing with excitement more than when he met Diana or Batman. The same way would be felt by anyone who knows what this character means in the comics. In addition, Dio felt even more excitement when he realized that all the amazing things he does every day in the comics were real in this world, not just in the comics. Who is this man? Coriandar asked curiously. Aqualad was standing next to her and provided her with a simple but truthful response. He is the greatest hero on Earth. Coriandar took another careful look at Superman and did not appear very surprised by this title. Aqualad can't blame her. She does not know Earth. He seems strong. Coriandar shows in her final inspection. Before they could say anything about what she said, Superman waved them off the ship, as he was tired of waiting for them to come to their senses. Let's go, Dio said to everyone. They turned and walked through what remained of the command bridge. Dio glanced at the Psion soldiers scattered on the floor. They couldn't escape as they attacked them, and their comrades chose not to save them with them on the ground. Now they are prisoners, and he can't help feeling some pity for them. Dio wouldn't want anyone, friend or enemy, to be an alien prisoner on Earth. They didn't have to walk far to find something similar to the side exits of an aircraft in the mothership. However, since the ship had no power, Dio had to cut their way out, and then they jumped out while Coriandar floated slowly to the ground. When they set foot on the ground, Superman was already in front of them, his hand extended to Dio. You must be Diana's apprentice. She spoke highly of you, Superman said with a smile at him. Dio moved quickly and shook his hand, which was as firm as steel. It's an honor, Superman. Dio replied from the heart. Superman smiled at him and let go of his hand, and then he looked at Kid Flash and Aqualad. It's good to see that you two are okay, Aqualad and Kid Flash. Superman said. Thank you, sir. Aqualad replied respectfully, but Kid Flash couldn't resist a playful comment. Hey, Supes, how's the strength holding up? Superman's faint smile in response to Kid's playful remark was a small victory for him. I'm doing great, Kid. Superman replied. Then Superman looked at Coriandar and asked, and who might you be? My name is Coriandar, and I am the Princess of Tamaran. The man in front of Coriandar didn't seem to bother her, and she appeared more interested in her surroundings. With this introduction, Superman looked at them and wanted an explanation. It's a long story, one we don't have all the details of either. Dio replied to him, and he nodded in understanding. Let's wait for the others so we can fill in the details. Superman said. Others? Aqualad asked with curiosity. Superman chuckled, turned and pointed to the sky, saying, the rest of the League. Dio's new friends don't have the same vision as him, so they couldn't see a green light ball flying towards them with a woman in red armor beside it. Shortly after, they arrived. Diana landed next to Superman and dashed towards me while giving him a hug. Thank Hera that you're not only well but also victorious. Diana said it with pride and concern in her voice. Lucky bastard. Kid Flash mutters quietly, so low that only those with super hearing can hear. Diana's hug ended when an African-American man controlling the green light bubble arrived and set it on the ground. It was clear that this Green Lantern was John Stewart as his whole suit was black, with only the top part being green. The Green Lantern symbol was in the middle of his chest on a white background, and his boots were green. This is one of the coolest superhero costumes. Then on the ground, the bubble that his ring and a line are holding together pops open to reveal Robin, Speedy, Batman, and two other people. One of them was wearing an outfit similar to Speedy's but in emerald green, and it was clearly the Green Arrow. Dio found his old-school mustache quite funny. The other was a man with straight blonde hair, holding a golden trident and wearing a shirt with golden scales and green pants with an A on his belt. It looks like a big part of the League of Justice is here. Batman took the lead. It's been 3 years since they met on that rooftop, but the way he looks at them still scares Dio. It's like he can see all of their secrets. Robin and Speedy have given a report on what happened in the city. It's your turn now. Batman said it in a calm voice. I would like Calder HM to speak first. Aquaman said it right after. Aqualad stepped forward like a soldier rather than a hero and placed his fist over his heart, a gesture that Dio thought was a sign of Atlantean respect. As you wish, my king, Aqualad said. Then Aqualad begins to recount everything that has happened since they arrived on the ship. The part where they talk about how their enemies looked interests the Green Lantern and the others because it's clear that they have never seen anything quite like the lizard-like creatures before. A few minutes later, the story is finished, and Batman just looked at them for a few seconds. Despite invading an enemy ship without an escape plan for yourselves and the captives, you did an acceptable job. Batman said to them. That was definitely a big compliment since Robin's face looked almost teary as he looked at his father and mentor. We still need to hear the story from our new and beautiful guest. The Green Arrow said and looked at Coriandar with almost starry eyes. This is Coriandar, princess of a planet called Tamarin. Superman introduced her to the League. Were you also kidnapped by these lizard people, Princess Coriandar? Diana asked formally. They're not lizards, they're psions, a race that lives in the Vega system. Coriandar replied. The rest of the League members and their sidekicks looked at Green Lantern, who was floating in the air, and waited for answers. Robin was looking at Coriandar without blinking. The Green Lantern's bodies know a lot about the universe, so the Lantern should also know something. I have no information about the Vega system, and there is no assigned Green Lantern for it. The Green Lantern replied. Our star system has never had a lantern assigned to it. Coriandar confirmed. What did these psions want with you, and why did they kidnap people without any explanation? Batman asked and looked concerned about an entire system being unprotected. Psions are mad geneticists. They're well known for kidnapping any alien race they come across for their experiments. I was one of their victims, just like my sister. Coriandar replied and looked a bit sad. How can you speak our language so well? The Green Arrow asked curiously. This made Kid and Aqualad look at Dio and made the atmosphere quite strange. Then, Diana noticed this and looked at Dio, waiting for him to speak. My species has the ability to learn any language through physical contact. Coriandar replied before him. Lucky bastard. Kid Flash cursed Dio again, this time quietly. The others, except for Robin and Batman, smiled at him, understanding what had happened. Now I'm curious, how did these lizards manage to kidnap a princess? You don't seem like an easy opponent. Diana asked. I don't want to talk about it, Coriandar said, looking agitated for the first time. This made the atmosphere a bit tense, but Diana nodded and changed the subject to the issue of the hostages and the unconscious psions aboard. Can I take the psions with me to OA? I'll also use the opportunity to gather some information about this Vega system from the Guardians. The Green Lantern said to settle the matter. Before the conversation continued, Dio saw some movement on the horizon, a large dust cloud approaching. The Texas reporters are certainly fast. Superman said it with a smile as he looked at the horizon. We'll stay here to take care of the prisoners and hostages in the meantime. Batman said that and looked at the sidekicks. Some of you should return to your private lives since you disappeared suddenly, and we don't want you to be declared missing. Batman continued. The kids should stay. This victory is theirs. Diana argued. We also haven't decided what to do with Princess Coriandar. Aquaman added. Batman grunted. Batman clearly didn't want to make them more public than the footage from the battle in the city. It's not like the young hero's partners were a secret, but most forces didn't consider them because they were all children. However, now these children had taken a spaceship on their own, and that drew attention. Chapter 42, Chapter 41. A few minutes later, police cars and vans from different TV stations drove up to the rocket and stopped a few meters away. The police officers quickly exited their vehicles, but they couldn't isolate the area before the reporters and their cameramen rushed past them toward the League of Justice. Are you sure about this, Diomedes? Diana asked quietly from his side and spoke in a quiet tone, so no one could hear his name except Superman. Diana was aware of his decision not to reveal himself in these past months, and she had been understanding, not forcing him into anything. Dio could have disappeared from their sight and hidden, but that became pointless when he used this armor and sword in front of hundreds of people. It was going to happen at some point, so why not now? Dio replied. It's been 2 days since the battle. After spending time with the League discussing what came next, they brought him to his school group. But before that, they made a stop to get another device since he lost his during the chaos. It wasn't difficult to come up with an excuse for his disappearance during all the events. Dio simply said that because of the crowd panicking and fleeing, he got separated from them. After seeing a doctor, which took over 4 hours because the hospitals were crowded with injured people, they went to a hotel where they slept. The next day, the school arranged for another rented bus to take them home. Finally, Dio arrived home. The first thing he did was take a shower and lie on the couch to rest his mentally exhausted self. "You're back," Vanessa yelled, jumped down the stairs, and gave him a big hug. After a few seconds, she let go and looked at his body. "Did you get hurt?" Vanessa asked as she looked concerned. "Not a scratch," Dio assured her. "That's good." Vanessa said that and sat beside him. "How have things been since I left?" Dio asked. Vanessa's mood soured before she responded. "Mom went on one of her trips, and I've just been studying for final exams," Vanessa replied. Vanessa had been preparing to get into a good college. In the past, she wanted to study archaeology like her mom, a clear shot to get closer to her. But after everything that happened, she decided to study medicine, a choice Dio fully supported. "Well, now I'm here. Do you want to do something?" Dio asked to try to cheer her up. "I thought you'd spend more time with your new friends since you're going to form a new group of young heroes," Vanessa said as she looked confused. "How do you know that?" Dio asked with curiosity. They agreed to join together and form a team. They had all worked together before but never officially formed a team until now. It was also decided that Cory and Dar would be under our protection in the base that was already being constructed. What surprised him was how Vanessa found out, as they hadn't released any information yet. "It's just speculation from the reporters, as all of you are now quite famous in New York because of the rescues, especially you, Dio. This was the first time you revealed yourself." That wasn't a surprise. Then Vanessa grabbed the remote control and switched to a news channel. "See, you're famous now, little brother," Vanessa said and pointed her hand to the screen. Vanessa tuned into a channel that was currently airing a popular program, The Cat Grant Show. The host, a beautiful blonde woman with blue eyes wearing a long red dress with a deep neckline, was talking about Dio. "You all know that I won't give up until I get information. Unfortunately, I haven't heard anything about Wonder Woman's new sidekick, who I think had the best debut of all of them." "Sidekick!" Dio exclaimed in frustration. It was being called something that certainly didn't feel good. "Haha." Vanessa laughed beside him. The image on the screen cuts to footage shot by cell phones. There are images of Dio fighting the darts that attacked the city. The camera was shaking, but it provided a good view of his victory. Then, the image was cut again to Kat, who smiled at the camera. "Even though I haven't gotten any new information, that doesn't mean I've given up on getting some information about the second being claiming to have a divine origin." Now Dio's face was shown on TV, with his magnificent black and gold armor, shield, and sword strapped to his back. It was a recording of the brief interview I gave to the reporters 2 days ago. In the video, Dio stood before several reporters and pointed their microphones at his face. Diana was beside him and put her hand on my shoulder to show support. The spaceship he attacked was behind him and made for a stunning background for the scene. "What's your name? What's your relationship with Wonder Woman? Is she your mother? How do you feel after saving so many people? Are you and the other young heroes forming a team?" The reporters bombarded him with questions and didn't give him time to answer. Dio confessed he was a little nervous. He had never received this much attention before. "I am." Then his voice forced all the reporters to fall silent. Dio might have used a little magic in his voice to do this, and he didn't regret it. They would probably have thought of him as just a kid without that. "I'm a demigod, just like Diana," Dio continued. Dio left those words hanging in the air and waited for them to say something. Since they remained silent, Dio continued. "I received several years of Wonder Woman's training before I received her approval to act, which is what I did today." It took a few seconds for another reporter to muster the courage to ask another question. "How do you want to be called from now on?" Dio responded to this question with confidence. "You can call me Kyrix." Dio chose that name on the spur of the moment, but he didn't regret it. Kyrix means herald in Greek, and its meaning somehow grew on him. To save himself from further embarrassment, he grabbed the remote control and turned off the TV. "Just stop laughing," Dio said, looking at Vanessa next to him and holding her stomach in pain from laughing so much at him. "Sorry, but for some reason, it just seems so funny," Vanessa replied. It took her a few minutes to calm down and be able to have a reasonable conversation. "When are you and the others going to join up?" Vanessa asked. "At the end of the month," Dio replied. "So soon?" Vanessa exclaimed. There were only a few days left in the month. The plans for forming this team were almost ready, and this event just sped things up a bit. Dio told his sister. Dio could see that she wasn't too happy about being alone in this house. She knew that when he joined the team, he would have to move to another city. "You don't need to be sad, Van. You know there are plenty of good colleges where I'm going, and we'll talk every day." Dio said this to her and tried to cheer her up. She was still sad, but she accepted it after a while. So the days passed. Dio focused all his attention on Vanessa and tried to make her strong for the little time she'd be alone. Dio also prepared for his departure. First, he went to see Zatanna, but her house had already disappeared, and she left only a key behind. It was actually a magical token. All he needed to do was fit it into any door and open it, and the room that would appear in front of me would be Zatanna's library. Dio was deeply moved by this gift. She had given him a direct passage to her house, and if it fell into the hands of some villain, it would be a nightmare. So Dio carefully stored the key. Next, Dio said goodbye to ARGUS, which had become more of his home than Julia's. It was a great farewell, with a small party and all his friends present. Well, I guess I'm ready. Dio said this to Vanessa, who was standing in front of him and tried not to cry but failed miserably. They were in the backyard of their house, where an ARGUS aircraft was waiting for him to take him to this new home. Take care, and don't forget to call me, Vanessa said. Dio hugged her. There was no need for more words. They had said everything in the last few days. Then they parted, and Dio picked up his small carry-on bag with his things. Dio used a small spell to make it bigger inside so that it could fit all his belongings. Dio got on the aircraft, and it immediately took off. During the trip, Dio began thinking about a way to fly or move more quickly. He really hated needing a ride. After an hour of travel, they finally crossed the city that had been attacked a few days ago. From what he could see, they had recovered quite quickly. The streets were already bustling with people. They flew over the city until they reached the East River in Manhattan. On a small island in the center of the river, a building had been built shaped like a T, with its front entirely made of mirrored glass. They were expected, so the aircraft landed smoothly on the helipad on the rooftop. Dio said his goodbyes and thanked the pilot, then went to the only metal door on the roof. When Dio stood in front of it, he searched for a way to open it, but it wasn't necessary. The door emitted a hologram that covered his entire body, and a robotic voice spoke. Welcome to the Titan's Tower, Kyrix. Chapter 43. Chapter 42. Beep, 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 blam. The first beep caught Dio off guard, and the second one made him angry, so he threw his pen at the alarm clock, piercing it and destroying it. Since Dio didn't need to sleep, he spent the entire night studying various spells from different magical systems. The alarm clock is convenient to remind him that it's morning. Otherwise, he would stay in his room for days without knowing the time. The problem was that he often forgot to turn off his super hearing while he was deeply studying. It was loud every time it beeped, so he quickly destroyed it. Dio could use his phone, but he was not that stupid. Dio stood up from his chair in front of his desk, which was covered in open books and scrolls, all of which he borrowed from Zatanna's library. They are all about levitation and floating magic. He leans on the table to look over all of his work. Dio had some time since it was 6 in the morning, and breakfast was normally served at 6:30. Dio had been studying levitation magic all week since he arrived at the Titan's Tower and tried to create his own flight spell. Unfortunately, it's going to take a little longer to succeed. The levitation spells allowed magicians to float and move in the air, but not at speed. It's possible to increase speed, but the mana consumption would be too high. That's why he needed to create a new spell, but it's difficult to create a spell focusing on speed because there are no spells like that. The reason was quite simple, and it was that magicians didn't see the need for fast flight. They don't need to be able to fly quickly because most people who practice magical arts fight from a distance. A teleportation spell is also more convenient and easy to use if you need to get from one place to another. But he was not like other magicians. Dio's fighting style is short to medium range. The ability to fly at the same speed he moves will make him much stronger. As for teleportation, the theoretical knowledge isn't too difficult for him since he can move through the shadows, which is natural teleportation. The only problem is his limitations in using spells. If he used something too powerful, he'd end up destroying himself. But that will change over time. Dio's resistance will increase, and as a demigod, they don't age after a certain age. He was confident that he could harness the full power of the Underworld's aspects in the future. In a few minutes, he finished reading all the information and also his unfinished spell. Dio still thinks he is far from achieving it, but it will take less time than he initially thought. Dio finally finished and looked around his room, which is quite simple, with just a double bed, a desk, a bookshelf, and a wardrobe. A normal room. Dio didn't have many things to decorate his room when he lived with Julia, and he hasn't changed much here either. There are some protection and anti-surveillance spells on the wall and posters of bands. Dio was not an idiot. This place was basically built with Batman's money, so there were many surveillance devices to gather information about them. So Dio invested a bit in these spells to have some peace and privacy in his own room. Dio grabbed his cell phone and saw a message from Vanessa, which he replied to before heading out the door. The Titan's Tower was well divided. There was a common area below on the floor with the bedrooms, connected by stairs. Below that, There were the men's locker rooms and showers, while the women's rooms had their own bathrooms. Further down, there was the gym, laundry room, infirmary, workshop, garage, and reception area. The floor above the common area and bedrooms was where the operations room was located, with computers and various other equipment. It's Robin's personal little cave since only he knew how to operate those devices, except for Coriandar, who was more advanced than us because she came from a more developed planet. Still, she didn't like entering the place much because she was more of a warrior type. There were also 2 underground levels and a small high-tech prison with 2 cells. There was an ocean below for an escape route in case of an emergency. They had a lot of freedom in this place, and they divided tasks like cooking and cleaning certain areas equally. They each completed various tasks, such as cleaning their rooms and doing the laundry. When he closed the door to his room, a small magical energy wave pulsed through it. This proves that his protection spells are active. Dio will be notified, and anyone who tries to break in will receive a small curse. Dio walked down the hallway and went to the stairs. The whole place was calm. Wally and Robin usually wake up after noon. Wally because he's lazy, and Robin because he spends the entire night working as a hero. There's no problem, as they all go to school in the afternoon, except for Coriandar. She won't escape this suffering for long. She just needs to get used to their habit a bit more before she's obliged to go. Of course, she's quite excited about it without knowing the kind of suffering that awaits her. Good morning, Diomedes. Coriandar greeted Dio. She's in the small kitchen downstairs, making breakfast. The food on Earth is very different from Tamarin's, so today is her first time trying it. Good morning, Coriandar. Dio replied as he sat at the table in the center of the kitchen. Coriandar is making something on the stove with her back to him. As usual, he glanced at something from her every morning. Coriandar is very open about her body and not at all shy. She doesn't wear vulgar clothing, but her outfits are tight and sexy. She smiled at him while holding a frying pan and a spoon in each hand, as if she knew what was on his mind. She then moves her attention back to the stove. You can try to seduce me as much as you want, succubus, but I won't be easily seduced. Good morning, my friends. Caldereachem said this and pulled Dio out of his humorous thoughts. Caldereachem wore regular clothes with simple navy blue pants and a shirt. Roy, not joining us again today? Caldereachem asked when he sat beside Dio. Of course not. Dio responded, his good humor fading a bit. Roy and Dio are avoiding each other as much as possible. Roy opens his big mouth and says stupid things every time they meet. Dio was staying away from places where he was, so Dio avoided attacking him when he was angry, and it looked like he was trying to do the same with them. Here, the food is ready. Coriandar said that and placed the frying pan right in front of them. What did you make, Coriandar? Dio asked and looked at the food. Fried eggs with bacon and pancakes. Coriandar cheerfully said while placing other plates on the table. Why are you so happy while cooking? Dio asked with confusion and looked at her smile. I've never had to do this before. It's fun to cook your own meal. Coriandar replied. Sometimes, I forget that this woman is the princess of an entire planet. As they started eating themselves, Caldereachem looked at her and asked, how's the search for your superhero codename and Earth name going? I haven't decided on my codename yet, but Batman has already created my Earth name. It's Corianders. Coriandar said happily. It's a good name. Caldereachem said this and turned his attention back to his plate. Why not use the meaning of your Tamaranian name as your code name? Dio suddenly said. Oh, Coriandar said and looked at Dio. What would your name be in our language? Caldereachem asked. It would be Starfire. Coriandar replied. I like it. Dio said. Me too. Caldereachem agreed. Using my name but also not using it, I like that too. Coriandar says happily. They kept talking and laughing while they ate breakfast. Caldereachem was the one who had to wash the plates when everyone else was done. At the same time, Coriandar and the narrator did what they always did and went to the floor where the gym was. The gym and training area were quite huge, and the best part was that there was specially prepared equipment for beings with superpowers. This allowed Dio to measure his strength and speed better and train them. The two of them changed into workout clothes. Dio was wearing shorts without a shirt, and Coriandar was wearing a sports bra, exposing her abdomen and black leggings. Staffs again? Coriandar asked in the center of the area, in the middle of the gym. Why not? Dio replied and went to a small rack where wooden staffs were kept. Dio took 2 of them and tossed one to her, which she caught in the air. He approached her and gripped the staff while looking at his opponent. Coriandar's cheerful and happy personality can deceive many people, but she's definitely one of the best trained warriors Dio had the joy of sparring with. Since she wasn't from this planet, Dio didn't know much about her martial arts, even though they were close to Earth in some ways. This made her the perfect person to train with. She was also glad to train with him all day after he got there. Chapter 44. Chapter 43. Coriandar made the first move. She floated a few inches in the air and slid forward, holding the staff with one hand at its tip like a sword. She thrust it toward the center of Dio's nose. Dio turned his body to the left to dodge, but she spun the staff to the same position where he turned and forced him to crouch to avoid the attack. While crouched, Dio counterattacked with his staff and aimed for her waist, but she held the staff with both hands and defended herself. When compared to martial arts practiced on Earth, the one she learned was specifically made for beings that can fly, which makes it hard to predict her movements. With their staff still meeting, she spun it and tried to strike his head. Dio managed to defend and counterattack, and they exchanged blows, alternating between defense, attack, and counterattack. Then she landed on the ground to reduce her height by a few inches, enough to catch Dio off guard, and she thrust the front part of the staff into his abdomen. Coriandar spun her body and kicked his leg, which caused Dio to fall backward. "Well, you lasted longer than last time," Coriandar said and extended her hand to help Dio up. "I'll take that as a compliment," Dio replied as he stood up on his feet. "And it was. It took a lot of training with the warlords of Okara for me to defend myself so well with a staff as you're doing now." Coriandar continued. "The warlords are great martial arts masters in the Vega system, where Coriandar comes from. It seems she trained there with her sister when she was younger." This was one of the few details she shared about her past. Coriandar doesn't like to talk about her past much, and Dio has a sense of why, so he'd rather not push her. "Another round?" Coriandar asked while holding the staff with both hands. "Sure," Dio replied. Dio got into position, but unlike her, he held his staff low with both hands and used it more like a sword. This time, Dio attacked first. He raised the staff above his head and brought it down toward her shoulder. Coriandar gracefully levitated in the air to dodge, but he predicted quickly. Dio stopped his downward strike and shifted it from the bottom to the side, just as she had done to him. The staff moved faster than her flying speed, which caused her to lower her head to defend herself and counterattack, aiming for his leg. Dio jumped to avoid the strike and kicked Corian's face. Coriandar defended herself in the middle of the staff and took advantage of the moment to create some distance. She then lunged with a thrust and targeted his chest. Dio dodged the first two strikes and counterattacked on the third. But that was what she was waiting for. She spun her body in the air and kicked Dio. Dio managed to defend her kick aimed at his chest, but the staff broke in two. However, Dio didn't give up. He grabbed the broken second half of the staff and attacked her with two strikes at the same time, one aimed at her extended ankle and the other at her chest. Dio managed to hit her leg and cause her to wince in pain, but the attack targeting her chest failed. "Are you okay?" Dio asked, as he was concerned about her leg. "Maybe I had gone a bit overboard. Injuries during training are common. Don't worry about them," Coriandar replied, though Dio could see that she was in pain. "Let me examine it. The training is over." Dio said it without giving her a chance to object. Coriandar sat on the floor while Dio checked her ankle. It wasn't swollen, so it wasn't broken. "Sorry, sometimes I forget that I'm not training with Wonder Woman." Dio apologized while still looking at her ankle. "I've already told you it's nothing. My natural healing is already at work, and the pain is disappearing." Coriandar continued. "Training with Diana helped me control my powers but not hold back because I didn't need to do that during our fights. Diana was stronger and more resilient than Dio, so he always went all out, and she was never injured. In addition, he didn't land many direct hits on her. After a few seconds, she was fully healed. If it weren't for that, Dio would have healed her." Dio was not very skilled in healing spells, but he had a very effective one, but not a pleasant experience. This little incident kind of killed the mood. "How about we work out a bit on the machines?" Dio suggested it to his gym partner. "I don't understand why you got so upset over such a minor injury, but okay, let's go to the machines," Coriandar replied as she stood up. As they walked toward the machines, Calderay-Chem entered the gym in his workout clothes. "Have you finished your physical training?" Calderay-Chem asked. Calderay-Chem also used this floor quite a bit, along with everyone else except Wally, who only came to brag that he could reach the treadmill's maximum speed. Roy tried to avoid him, so he came at a different time. Robin tried to train with them in the morning, but he fell asleep during an exercise and almost got hurt, so he didn't try again. "I accidentally injured her during our fight, so we stopped." Dio explained it to him. "Are you all right?" Calderay-Chem asked and looked at her with concern. "It was just a minor injury. I'm completely healed," Coriandar replied and went toward one of the gym machines. Calderay-Chem then approached Dio and asked in a low voice, "What happened?" "Nothing serious. I just don't have much control over my strength. I ended up hurting her ankle, but it healed in a few seconds." Dio explained more. "Understood. Do you want to work out while we talk about magic?" Calder-AHM asked and changed the subject. Sure. So the two of them went to the futuristic-style treadmills, turned them on to speeds much higher than any normal human could run, and began their conversation while enjoying a light warm-up. Calder-AHM wasn't a sorcerer or magician. His magical powers came from his tattoos. It wasn't necessary for him to understand how the tattoos worked in order to use his powers. He just had to learn how to infuse energy into them. This way, everyone who didn't focus on creating tattoos trained and learned only to manipulate them. It was a magical shortcut. When Dio met this version of Aqualad, he was quite excited about the possibility of discovering some of the secrets of his Atlantean magic. Atlantean magic was one of the first systems created on Earth, but the truth was boring. It seemed that the true Homo Magi of Atlantica were few, and the reason for this was somewhat vague. According to Calder-AHM, Atlantean magic is fueled by belief, will, and faith in Atlantis itself. However, it seems that this magic has been corrupted in some way and made quite thin. So they came up with tattoos, which are shortcuts made and spread by the royalty of the country of Zeeble, who can naturally manipulate water. Din 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 din. While they were running and talking, the alert signal started beeping. Coriandar, who was closer to the communicator on the wall near the door, went to it and pressed a button, asking, "What happened?" "Get dressed and go to the roof now." Robin's voice responded without providing many details. Those were just a few words, but the three of us acted immediately. They entered the elevator and made a brief stop on the floor where our rooms were located. That's where Aqualad and Coriandar changed into their costumes, while Dio simply touched the black metal of his pendant to have his armor spread over his entire body. Coriandar and Aqualad returned dressed in their suits, and as they ascended, Dio couldn't help but keep his eyes on Coriandar's new outfit. It was quite sexy. She was wearing a purple outfit that clung to her body, with the center of her chest exposed, which revealed a bit of skin, and a miniskirt. She had 2 silver bracelets on her wrists and matching boots, all in the same color as her outfit. It was simple but perfect for her, with her long red hair flowing freely and her orange skin. They arrived on the roof, and in the center of it was the Titan's means of transportation. Dio can't describe it better than a wide, silver flying car with multiple seats. Kid Flash, Robin, and Speedy were all in their places, with Robin in the front as the pilot. "Hurry!" Kid Flash yelled at them. Aqualad and Dio rushed to the flying car while Coriandar flew to her seat. When they were all seated, the car took off towards the city. "What happened?" Aqualad asked in the middle of the flight. "Without looking at us," Robin replied. "A metahuman just attacked a jewelry store a few minutes ago and stole thousands of dollars worth of jewels. The police tried to stop him, but they were not enough. At this moment, the metahuman is leaving a trail of destruction in his escape." "I see," Aqualad responded. "Did the League approve this mission?" Dio asked with hope in his eyes. "I received the mission directly from Martian Manhunter, but all the other League members are busy, so we'll have to fight this battle without supervision." Robin replied. "Stop being a coward, rookie!" Speedy shouted, but Dio ignored him. The League of Justice wouldn't let a group of teens live alone without supervision, as Dio said before. That's why they made rules, like not going on tasks without a League member with us to help them if something goes wrong. A League member would also stay in the Titan Tower with them every once in a while. These rules are good. They forgot one important thing was that they were very busy. Since they moved in, not a single one of them has come to stay with them. This made some members think they could go on their first mission without getting permission from the League, which Dio thought was a bad idea and made Roy think of him as a coward. Chapter 45, Chapter 44. What's the plan? Coriandar asked and shifted into warrior mode. The plan and the information were announced by Robin, who was their unofficial boss. "Kid, Aqualad, and I will clear the streets. Meanwhile, Kyrix, Speedy, and Coriandar will target the objective." Robin explained. "It's Starfire." Coriandar corrected. "What do you mean?" Robin asked with confusion. "I decided that would be my code name." Starfire responded. "When did this happen?" Kid Flash asked while looking puzzled. "Earlier this morning." Starfire continued. "Enough joking around." Speedy interrupted. Robin was about to say something to Speedy, but before he could speak, Kid shouted, "Look out!" Robin quickly refocused his attention on the road in front and turned the flying car to the right, just in time to avoid being hit by the motorcycle that was thrown in their direction. They all tensed up at how close the motorcycle came to hitting them. "We've arrived," Robin then said. Dio looked ahead and saw an ordinary street, but it was empty of people. Instead, it was swarmed with police who had set up perimeters on both sides of the street using their patrol cars. They were taking cover behind their vehicles and firing pistols and shotguns at the man standing in the middle of the street. He was likely responsible for the motorcycle that nearly hit them. "You forgot to mention our enemy's size, super strength, and resistance, Robin." Kid Flash spoke with anxiety evident in his voice. Kid had every right to think that their opponent was intimidating. He was well over 2 meters tall, and his body appeared entirely of muscle, and his broad shoulders gave the illusion that he was a giant. He wore only a black vest and pants, exposing his arms, and had shoulder-length red hair and a beard. Unfortunately, Dio couldn't recognize him in any of the DC characters he knew, so he only knew what everyone else does now. The police need help now. Aqualad shouted upon seeing the giant lifting a parked car on the street and facing one of the barricades. Starfire! Dio yelled, and she understood. Starfire flew out of their vehicle towards the giant, and as he threw the car, she was close enough to hit him with her energy blasts from above, forcing the car to fall to the ground a few meters away from the police officers. We need to land, Kid Flash said. I'll go in front, Aqualad warned. I'm going too, Dio also replied. Since there were no people in the street to clear, Robin's plan had to change. Unfortunately, they didn't have much time to wait for him to instruct them. Robin couldn't land the car in the middle of the street. They'd be easy targets. So Robin had to take them to one of the rooftops of the buildings on the street. Aqualad simply jumped out of the car, and Dio teleported to the ground. With the instant movement of shadows, Dio touched the ground before Aqualad landed. This height wouldn't hurt him. Atlanteans are much more resilient than humans. Dio then drew his sword and shield from his back and sprinted toward the enemy. When Dio reached the first perimeter, he jumped over it. The police had the courtesy and intelligence not to continue firing since Starfire arrived, and at this moment, she was firing green energy blasts at the giant from a distance. The giant was swinging his hands as if trying to grab her, but she was much more agile in the air. When she saw Dio approaching, she spun in the air and made the giant turn his back to Dio in an opening position. Dio was certainly going to accept the invitation. Dio accelerated with a burst of speed from one point to another, and he appeared right in front of the giant's back. Dop jumped to the perfect height and attacked with his shield aimed at his head. However, he somehow managed to predict his movement and turned to face his strike. But it didn't matter. The blow was too close for him to dodge. But the giant managed to surprise Dio by delivering a headbutt to his shield. Blam! It sounded like his head was made of metal, as it was that hard. The force of his headbutt caused Dio to retreat a few meters, which stopped his attack. The giant seemed satisfied with his strength and smiled at Dio, a smile that disappeared when Starfire hit his back with her attack. Clearly infuriated, the giant spun his body and tried to punch her, but he made the mistake of getting too close. The punch was stopped before it could hit her by a whip made of luminescent water that coiled around the giant's wrist. Aqualad arrived just in time. The giant wasn't stupid. When he saw he was being restrained, he grabbed the whip with his other hand, turned his body, and lifted Aqualad off the ground as if he were a toy. The giant continued to spin him in the air until the water whip snapped and threw Aqualad at high speed toward a wall on the other side of the street. Dio was about to help him when a golden blur passed by his side and ran up the wall, held Aqualad's body, and then disappeared and reappeared by Dio's side. Thanks, Kid Flash. Aqualad said this and looked at his friend. You're welcome, Kid Flash replied. Now, how are we going to deal with this? Dio asked. There was no time to plan as several arrows flew over the giant's head and hit the giant's body. The giant didn't seem the least bit scared by them and didn't appear to be injured when they hit his back. The ones that touched his body didn't break. Instead, they went through a thin layer of skin and got stuck. This meant that his invulnerability wasn't as ridiculous as Superman's. Even if it were, Dio's sword had magical enchantments that were about to be tested against invulnerable beings. Chapter 46. Chapter 45. What's the plan? Kid asked over the communicator. We're going to attack together and make sure no police officers get hurt. Robin replied from a few kilometers away on top of a building with Speedy by his side. It's not a good plan, but given the situation, there's nothing else they can do. Their enemy doesn't seem to be the type to use his head, and the police are too proud to retreat and leave everything to them. At least they were kind enough not to shoot in the back, which would be one more thing Dio have to worry about. One interesting thing Dio discovered about his demigod powers is that he was not bulletproof. To be more precise, sharp things can cut his skin. Dio really didn't understand this. For example, Diana can fall from a 100-story building and not be seriously injured. They can absorb the impact and heal almost instantly, but a bullet can kill them. That's why they receive so much training to compensate for this weakness. Dio stopped thinking about it and focused on the battle again. Starfire hasn't tried to get closer and has started firing her green blasts from a distance, but it seems she's holding back because the giant didn't seem to be suffering much damage. Kid Flash then entered the fight and ran at high speed towards their enemy. Kid jumped and kicked the giant squarely in the head, and when the giant fell to the ground, Kid Flash sped away before getting hit by a punch from his opponent. You missed, Bigfoot. Kid taunted. Bigfoot? I'm Mammoth. Mammoth shouted for the first time in response. Look, he can talk. Kid Flash continued to tease. In response, Mammoth went to a vehicle on the sidewalk, lifted it, and threw it in the direction Kid Flash had passed, which Dio's direction. When Dio turned around, he saw that dodging would hurt several police officers, so he put his shield and sword on his back and held the car in front of him while using both hands. "Watch out, Kirix!" Starfire yelled. While holding the car in front of him, he couldn't see why, and before Dio could set it down, Mammoth's arm pierced the car's body and hit him directly. The punch didn't hurt much, but it caused the car to explode, and sent Dio flying backward. Dio did several somersaults in the air to avoid falling and hurting anyone. Then he used the shadow's movement to reappear on the second floor, on the roof of a building. "Kirix, are you okay?" Robin asked through the communicator. "I'm fine," Dio replied while walking to the edge of the roof where he was. "Funny, right? Dio can be injured by a bullet, but not by an explosion like that. Let's finish him off by attacking together." Aqualad shouted over the communicator. "I agree, Kirix, come back here soon." Robin yelled. Dio looked down and saw everyone attacking at the same time. Robin, Aqualad, and Speedy are now engaged in a closer combat, while Starfire is still in the distance and firing her blasts. Dio was about to join in and end the battle when he saw movement outside one of the perimeter. Soon, 4 big black police cars with the police logo on them stop a few meters from their vehicles. There are a lot of troops getting out of the cars with tactical black clothes and big guns and surround the barrier. The SWAT team is here. Dio thought they would just stay and protect their position while they fight, but to his surprise, one of the SWAT members grabs a grenade launcher and pointed it at the center of the battle. Dio jumped from the building where he was and landed a few inches from him, ripping the weapon from his hand. "What are you doing, kid?" One of the SWAT members angrily shouts. The likely SWAT leader has all the typical of a lousy cop, which is short with a big belly and a terrible mustache. "You were about to shoot at my friends. Of course I'm stopping you," Dio replied and then twisted the barrel of the weapon to render it useless and throw it on the ground. "I was trying to stop these freaks from destroying my street. Arrest this kid now," the police officer yelled. Before Dio get attacked and start a battle against the police because of their useless leader, he teleport to the other side of the perimeter and run toward the battle. They need to end this quickly before this idiot attacks. The first thing Dio saw is Robin swinging with his bat claw and hitting Mammoth's head with both feet. Speedy passed under him and fires a point-blank arrow right into his chin, causing a small explosion. Mammoth then took a few steps back only to be hit in the back of his leg by Aqualad, who had turned his water into a spiked club. The force of the blow made him raise his leg, and Kid Flash enters the fight, running around Mammoth so fast that he creates a small tornado, sending him flying into the air. Starfire jumps out from above and hits him in the stomach with both arms spread out. He is 5 meters high and can't avoid the blow. This sends him flying to the ground. Dio attack at that point. "Επικαλούμε το κρύο της λήψης του ποταμού Cocyte. I summon the cold of the river Cocytus." Dio used the shadow's movement to appear beneath him a few inches from the ground and attack. A black mist like pitch covers Dio's sword, lowering its temperature and coating it in ice. Dio point the sword upward and thrust it into Mammoth's shoulder. The force of the hit made both of them spin in the air and left Dio facing the ground. When the Mammoth's weight is about to flatten Dio, he twisted his body, which caused Dio to fall face first onto the ground. Dio pushed his sword even further, pierced Mammoth's entire body and reaching the ground. His skin is quite hard, and he had to exert some force. Mammoth screamed in pain and tried to move his body on the ground, but Dio's magic begins to take effect, and ice slowly starts to cover his body. "Let me go," Mammoth shouted, and his 2 hands wrapped around Dio's neck, trying to choke Dio. "Starfire and Aqualad, help him." Dio heard Robin shout from somewhere. Starfire appeared by his side and pulled one of his arms from his neck, forcing it to the ground with her 2 hands. On the other side, Aqualad fired his water whip, which wraps around the second hand's wrist and took it off Dio's neck as well. Meanwhile, Dio was still paying attention to his magic. He couldn't freeze him completely. He would die if that happened. He also couldn't freeze him too little, as he could escape. So, he was guided by his instinct. The ice then covered Mammoth's legs, stopped his struggles, and then his entire torso, leaving only his heart unfreezed. Finally, his arms and head were covered and turned him into a frozen mammoth. "Shift!" Dio withdraw his sword from his shoulder and get off him. "Thank you both for your help." Dio thanked Aqualad and Starfire, who just nodded. "Did you kill him?" Speedy asked as he approached with the rest of the team. "No, he'll thaw in a few hours," Dio replied while monitoring his heartbeat. Robin then raised his wrist and typed something on his mini-computer. "The metahuman transport unit is on its way. We just have to make sure he doesn't escape until then," Robin said. "It was truly a beautiful use of magic, my friend. It takes a lot of skill to freeze a living being without permanently harming them or worse." Aqualad said so and examined his new ice sculpture. The invulnerability helped a lot. I wouldn't try something like this without that. It was the same situation with the psions. Their physiology allowed Dio to let loose a bit. If you two start talking about magic, I'll take a stroll around the city, Kid said while twitching his mouth. After spending some time together, Dio told them about some of his abilities. Wally is a man of science, but he's not foolish enough to deny the existence of magic. I don't trust the newbie's parlor tricks either. We should handcuff this guy, Speedy said as he approached Mammoth with an arrow knocked on his bow. Don't do that. The ice is very fragile. Any sudden action, and it will shatter like glass. Dio said that and stopped Speedy. In fact, Dio was lying and wanted him to look even more stupid than he already is. It worked. Guys, the police are here, Kid said while pointing to the SWAT team with their leader in the front coming their way. Great. Dio sighed. Any problem? Aqualad asked as he noticed Dio's unhappy tone. Their leader is an idiot. Let's try not to beat him from now on. Dio said something, and everyone just looks at him like they don't understand it. From now on, I'm in charge of him. Get out of here before I arrest you for damaging public property. The officer said this to all of them. Seriously, man? Kid exclaimed in surprise like everyone else by his attitude and audacity. That's no way to act with your elders, kid. Well, what can you expect from people like you? The officer looks at each one of them disdainfully until he looks at Starfire and freezes. Of course, all the men here understood why, and they didn't like it one bit. Chapter 47. Chapter 46. Can I shoot an arrow in his leg? Speedy asked, and for the first time since Dio knew him, Dio liked what he said. What? The officer shouted in fright and took a few steps back. Maybe it's better to take him somewhere to cool off, like a very exclusive island in the Atlantic Ocean. Kid Flash suggested. As tempting as that sounds, let's just wait for the transport in a more distant place before I agree with your suggestions. Aqualad said. So they all went to the rooftop of a building right across the street, where they could see all the chaos. Could someone explain why you all got so angry with that ugly man? Starfire asked. She comes from a planet where her culture is much more open compared to theirs, so Dio tries to explain it in the best way for her. Apart from the fact that he spoke to us and looked at us as if we weren't human, he looked at you with desire. And is that wrong here on Earth? Starfire asked again. No, you definitely draw a lot of attention with your beauty, but he didn't look at you as if he admired your beauty. It was more like if you were an object to satisfy him. Robin continued. He's taken a small bird-shaped dart from his belt and is staring straight at the idiot below. I see. Starfire said this while also thinking about it. The transport has finally arrived. Kid Flash said this and pointed to the other side of the street, where a large bus was approaching. A group of guys in blue uniforms get off the bus and walk up to Mammoth. But they can't move the frozen mammoth, so Dio had to come down to thaw him out. As a precaution, Dio thawed only his torso and arms and left his legs frozen. After that, he was handcuffed with the thickest handcuffs Dio had ever seen, dragged to the back of the truck, and went to Belle Reve prison, which is the place used to contain metahuman criminals. Mission accomplished. Now, how about celebrating with some pizza? Kid asked when Dio returned to the rooftop where everyone was. Boom! Then, the transport vehicle explodes into a fireball in the middle of the road. Kid! After a few seconds of shock, Robin screamed. Kid Flash ran toward the flaming bus. Aqualad and Speedy, contain the flames. Robin continued and gave them the orders. Aqualad and Speedy jumped from one building to another in the direction of the fire. Then Kid Flash reappears in front of Dio, Robin, and Starfire. Mammoth disappeared through the sewers. Kid informs us. The three of us will pursue him. Kid Flash, you have to look for any other metahuman nearby. That explosion was a long-distance attack. Robin explained, and they all moved. Before entering the sewers, Dio saw Aqualad manipulating the water to put out the fire, and Speedy shot an arrow into the remaining flames of the vehicle. Then they entered the sewer. Dio always feels at home in dark places, but this was the first time he entered the underground part of a city, and he can't help but imagine his personal hell being like this. Just imagine the dirtiest and smelliest place anyone can, and then add super senses to it all. Fortunately, the place was wide enough for the three of them. There was a long corridor with a dirty water stream running in the center, and the walls were old. It's likely that this place has never seen renovations since it was built. This place stinks worse than the warlord's bathrooms. Starfire spoke in a very low voice, with one hand holding her nose. I just checked the maps. This tunnel literally leads to any part of the city, even the ocean. Robin said this and looked at his wrist monitor without seeming to mind the smell. I can't see any trace of Mammoth. He's definitely getting help. Dio said this to everyone and looked at the ground with his night vision.
You both can see in the dark?
Robin asked with curiosity.
Yes.
Dio replied. I can't see in the dark, but I was trained to fight in it.
If you want, I can light up my hands.
Starfire suggested.
No, my mask has night vision.
They continued walking through the sewers, going further and further without finding any sign of their enemy. What cute creatures! Starfire then said, looking at a group of rats, which made both Robin and Dio scrunch up their faces. Starfire, your definition of cute is a bit off. When we get back home, I'll show you some earth animals to fix that. Dio told his friend with pity. What kind of creatures exist in her world for her to genuinely find a rat cute? After more time searching.
That's enough,
Robin said. We've been walking for over an hour, and we've completely lost him. Dio agreed with him. He didn't seem like an intelligent enemy to cover his tracks like this.
Maybe he has an ally.
Starfire speculated out loud. I agree. Let's get out of this stench, Robin said while looking for the nearest exit. They left the sewer through an exit just a few meters from where they were. Aqualad kindly brought the hovercar to them. Robin took the wheel, and they went home. On the way, Aqualad explained that they easily extinguished the fire, but none of the officers in the transport survived the explosion. Kid Flash also couldn't find the person responsible for the attack. With a bad mood for their first mission not ending in a complete victory, they arrived home, and all those who had spent more than an hour in the sewer rushed to the bathroom. Coriandar was in such a hurry that she started taking off her suit, threw it on the floor, and left her in just her underwear on her way to her room. Unfortunately, Dio will have to teach her a bit of modesty later, as he is the mentally eldest member of this group. After a long shower, they gathered on the couch, where they sat. There was a group of people sitting in front of it. Even though everyone was sitting down and clean, no one spoke up, so Dio did. Has anyone reported what happened to the League? Dio asked. I just sent a written report to Batman. He'll get in touch with us when he has time. Dick responded as he was sitting on the floor in front of him in a defeated pose.
There's no need to be so down, Robin. The escape was completely unexpected.
Dio continued and tried to cheer him up. I agree with Dio, but even knowing that doesn't make me feel better. Aqualad said this while sitting on the couch next to Dio. Even when you do everything right, there's a chance you might still lose.
It's a common saying on my planet. Coriandar said on the other side and was drying her long red hair with a towel.
But I really would like to avoid going into the sewers again, forever. Coriandar continued.
Don't speak for yourselves. I don't need anyone's approval.
Roy vented his anger, like always, by acting like a fool. He then left the group and went for the elevator.
Roy, where are you going?
Wally asked.
To train.
He's the kind of warrior who likes to train to relieve his frustrations.
I understand that.
Coriandar nodded in agreement with Roy's actions. It's always good to punch things and lift weights when you're mad, but Dio would rather think of a way to fix his mistakes. Instead of sitting here grumbling, why don't we go after him again? Dio suggested. I don't think the League would like us going after Mammoth on our own again. Wally said. We don't need the League's permission to just look for him. Dio tried suggesting the idea again, and it seems to have worked. Robin got up from the floor, calmed down and said, there is something very wrong with the robbery. I can look into it to try to find answers. Wasn't it just a simple robbery? Calder-HM asked. Robin put his hand on his chin and started walking back and forth in front of them. He broke into a jewelry store with hundreds of millions in gemstones and jewelry and only stole one item. An item that wasn't listed as the most valuable on the premises. Robin told everyone. Dio needs to make a mental note to get Dick to share more details. If he had known this earlier, he would have immediately tried to recover the stolen item. It was a mistake on his part as well to not ask. They all understand this here, but they also understand that this isn't the best time to tell him. Is there a picture of the jewelry? DOP asked Dick, who is still pacing back and forth in the room.
I'll look for one now,
Robin said, stopped his walking, and rushed to the elevator. Wally and Calder-HM stood up and followed him, and Dio joined them. Aren't you coming? Dio asked Coriandar. I'm starving, and it looks like the investigation won't be over anytime soon, so I'm going to eat something first. Coriandar replied, stood up, and ran toward the kitchen. Chapter 48. Chapter 47. An interesting fact about her is that her stomach seems bottomless. She can eat even more than a speedster like Wally. Dio was not stupid enough to stand between her and her food. Dio entered the elevator with the other boys, without Roy, and they went to Robin's little cave. The cave is quite small, just a little room of 15 square meters with 5 in width. The place is dark, except for the light from the huge monitors mounted on the wall. There are 4 large screens arranged in the shape of a C, facing downward and a leather armchair in front of a keyboard.
The only things other than the computer and the chair that keep the device on the other side of the wall in good shape are air conditioners.
Dick quickly sat in his chair and started typing on the keyboard while the rest of them took positions around him and looked at the information displayed on the computer screen.
I found it!
Dick exclaimed excitedly, and all 4 screens showed the same image. The jewel has an oval shape, is the size of a palm, and is red like a ruby. A valuable gem called a red stone is surrounded by gold metal that has small letters engraved into it in a language that no one can understand. Any additional information about it? Wally asked as Dio tried to decipher the writing. No, just that the jewel was recently found in a private excavation and was kept in the jewelry store's vault until it was scheduled to be transported for auction in 5 days. Can you zoom in on the inscriptions, please? Calderay HM requested. Their vision isn't as sharp as Dio's, so they need a closer look. Soon, the image is zoomed in to show the inscriptions on the ruby, but Dio still can't figure out what language it is. Later, Dio can ask for Vanessa's help. She isn't an expert like her mother, but she learned about ancient civilizations from the people around her, so she knows more about this topic than Dio does. If she doesn't know, maybe this will be intriguing enough for Julia to help him. The computer couldn't identify this language. Dick continued, also intrigued by the inscriptions. That's because this is an ancient archaic language of Atlantica. Calderachem spoke, which surprised them. Can you translate it? Wally asked, eagerly looking at him. I'm not an expert, but I believe it says, the Amulet of Arion. A lot of people want to visit Washington, D.C., but right now, the most popular spot is the Hall of Justice, which is where the Justice League's headquarters are located. The structure of the huge building was a unique mix of Greek and modern styles, which makes sense since Wonder Woman and Green Lantern designed it and Superman built it from scratch in just a few minutes. This building happened only a few months ago. Since then, visitors could explore some of the building's rooms to learn about the history of past and current heroes. Of course, there were areas not open to the public, like the League's meeting room, where 4 of its members are currently gathered.
You did what? Green Arrow shouted as he rose from his chair and slammed his fist on the table.
A test, Batman replied while sitting on the opposite side of the 3-meter by 1-meter square table. You tested our protégés without telling us against a metahuman? Green Arrow shouted again. Despite my dislike of this, why don't we let Batman explain his reasons? Wonder Woman interjected, seated with her arms crossed, looking sternly at Batman. Batman answered calmly, I tested the new team to see if they could work together successfully against an enemy without one of us watching over them. Batman, we agreed together that the Titans wouldn't take any missions without a League of Justice member accompanying them. Superman said while sitting on the other side and was faced with Wonder Woman. Batman looked at him and responded with the same calm voice. We don't have enough time to do this task. Have any of you had enough time to stay with them since they began? Batman's question left everyone in silence. Due to our obligations, we were unable to fulfill the agreement. I checked if the task could proceed without our assistance. Batman continued. The other 3 members still didn't like it, but he was right. They didn't have time to do what was agreed upon. Still, testing the kids in this manner was wrong and dangerous. Green Arrow shouted again. I was present the whole time. They just didn't know it. Batman countered and ended Green Arrow's arguments. That's why John didn't inform us that the kids weren't alone since you were there. Superman guessed. Then everyone fell silent, and Green Arrow calmed down a bit and said, I still don't agree with this test, but what was the result? Batman took the opportunity and pressed a button on the table that caused several screens scattered around the room to light up and display the recording of the fight against Mammoth. Both the strategy, execution, and teamwork were acceptable. There were no major mistakes made by any of the members. In the end, I think they're ready to work alone when necessary. Batman assessed everyone.
Wow, Diana. You've certainly trained him well.
Green Arrow said while looking at the scene where Kirix plunged his sword into Mammoth's shoulder and froze him with his magic. Diana saw this scene and also felt a sense of pride, demonstrating it with a broad smile. It's good to see that he hasn't stopped training both his magic and his sword since we parted ways. Diana said. So they passed your test. I thought it would be the opposite, given that the prisoner escaped. Superman interjected. I can't blame them for something I couldn't even stop. Batman replied. Then, the images shifted to the scene of the prisoner transport's explosion. Does this mean that when the explosion occurred, you intervened? Green Arrow asked. That's correct, but I couldn't find his trail in the sewers. This group is skilled enough to explode a car in front of me, recover the prisoner, and escape without leaving a trace. Group? Diana asked. As I mentioned, there isn't any hard evidence, but my gut tells me 2 people carried out the escape.
What was the objective then?
Superman asked. A jewel. I'm about to investigate. Beep. A signal on Batman's wrist device stopped him. He read the message on his wrist computer and then informed everyone. The Titans have found some clues about the reason for the theft and are requesting one of us to go there. They've also asked for Aquaman's presence. It seems the kids want to do something about their defeat, and that's a good thing. Diana commented. There were nods of agreement from everyone except Batman. I'll send a message to Aquaman. Who's coming with me to talk to them? Batman asked. I'll go with you. I'd like to see my apprentice. Diana volunteered. Chapter 49. Chapter 48. It took just a few minutes to gather all the information about the stolen amulet. Unfortunately, there wasn't much to work with. Calder-AHM knew a lot about ancient magical amulets, but he couldn't give them a deep understanding of them. He then contacted a friend of his in Atlantis who might have more information, as their king wasn't answering calls. The conversation with his friend was quick, but it created a sense of urgency. The amulet was no ordinary item. Robin placed an emergency call to Batman, and within minutes, the Batplane landed on the rooftop helipad, with Diana flying alongside him. What's the information? Batman asked as he stepped out of his plane. They were on the rooftop, and Batman wasted no time and didn't even wait for them to enter the building. It had been some time since Dio had seen him, and he appeared as cold and intimidating as ever. Diana stood beside Dio, her hands on her waist, and smiled at them as she always did. We've obtained some information about the theft. I think it's best if Calder-AHM explains. Robin said this to Batman. Calder-AHM took the lead and started to talk about what the team had discovered. The stolen jewel is the amulet of Arion. Calder-AHM said. Great Hera. Diana exclaimed and interrupted. You know him? Batman asked. Arion is well known among the Amazons. He was one of the first heroes of ancient Atlantis, and he was born before the Great Flood. Diana explained. That still doesn't explain the Great Hera. Dio said. Arion is a being of immense power and powerful enough to seal away the ancient gods known as the Black Giants. That means the power of any artifact bearing his name is powerful. Diana went on. Diana continued. They had gained some information about what the amulet could do, but not about its current owner. However, knowing its previous owner was enough to justify calling in the League. What information did you gather about the amulet's use? Batman asked Calder-AHM. Not much, only that the stone is a sort of magical battery connected to the gods. Calder-AHM replied. Gods? Like Poseidon? Batman asked. No, I'm referring to the gods of Atlantis before it sank. It was only after that event that Poseidon became our patron. Calder-AHM clarified. Because of the event where Atlantis sank into the sea, they lost an important part of their history and knowledge. It's not an exaggeration to say that their technology level before the sinking was far superior to what they have now. Atlantis is still one of the most powerful nations in the world, even though they lost a lot of their knowledge. We still lack information about the amulet and who might know about it. Batman pondered aloud. Batman made an interesting point. How did the person who stole the amulet know its value? After learning a lot from a good detective, Robin came to the same conclusion. A magic user could recognize the jewel's value even without knowing its history, which would also explain the miraculous escape that just happened. Robin said. I agree. Batman replied. Then Dio realized that the agreement was too confident in the possibility that there was nothing they could do in that situation. Furthermore, they hadn't sent any detailed reports about what happened for him to arrive at this conclusion. You were watching us, weren't you? Dio asked Batman, and everyone turned to him. Yes, I was. Batman replied without changing his cold and emotionless expression. A test. Dio asked again. Correct. Batman answered. Dio didn't mind. He didn't care about this, as he knew what the comics told him. It's likely that he already has 10 different plans to defeat Dio, if necessary. Dio was fine with that. But his team wasn't. You said this team was approved, and now you're testing us? Roy asked furiously. I wasn't testing you for that reason but to see if the team could function without the supervision of a League member. Batman explained. Dio ignored him and looked at Diana. You approved this too? This level of paranoia is expected from Batman, but Dio would feel bad if Diana had been involved as well. Wonder Woman and the other League members didn't know that I was watching you or that you were working alone. Batman replied on her behalf and gave Dio relief. I noticed, Robin said, which surprised everyone except Batman. Why didn't you say anything? Wally asked. It didn't matter. I know you probably didn't like it, but that was our fight, whether he was watching us or not. Robin replied. I don't mind either, and I'm just a little upset that I couldn't sense his presence. Coriandar said and gave her opinion on the matter. She has a good point. Dio's senses were very sharp, but all he could see or hear were the heartbeats of his team and the other police officers. Of course, Batman could have stayed out of Dio's range, but he was almost sure that he had entered the sewer with them when the escape began. Dio kept his senses at a normal level in the upper city, but he used them all the way to the limit in the sewers and still didn't sense Batman. In addition to his training, his suit must have helped him do this. He remembered that there was a version of his suit that could hide his presence from almost everything, even telepathic beings. From the anger on Roy's face, Dio knows he's going to talk about this subject for a long time, so he tries to get the topic back to what's important right now before he speaks. How are we going to track the amulet? Dio asked.
We could ask the king to talk to the queen. She might have a spell for it.
Calder suggests. Aquaman is currently in the middle of the Atlantic and was dealing with a massive oil spill on a vessel. Batman said.
Zatanna.
Dio asked Diana. She's currently unreachable. Diana replied and didn't provide many details. Then Diana looked at Batman and said, What about Dr. Fate?
He's not very helpful.
Batman responded without hesitation.
It's either him or Constantine. Dr. Fate, then.
Batman replied without a second thought.
I'll go along.
Dio shouted in excitement and then felt a bit embarrassed for my lack of control, making Diana laugh. When Dio has the chance to meet the Sorcerer Supreme of Earth, he is usually very quiet and calm, but when it comes up, Dio gets a little excited. Dio doesn't even mind knowing that the jerk Constantine has had encounters with them. Since Dio started studying magic, he has developed more respect for those on the mystical side of heroes, and Dr. Fate is the most powerful living sorcerer. Unfortunately, he's an arrogant jerk, or at least that's how he's usually shown, but his arrogance is acceptable. The guy is so powerful it's almost ridiculous. A lot of people think Superman is the strongest being on Earth, but they're wrong. There are many monsters and other entities in this little world that are stronger than him, and Dr. Fate is one of them.
Yes, Dio, you can come.
Diana accepted his request. Dio already knows about some of her adventures, as she tells him about them. In this reality, Dr. Fate has been active since World War II, when Diana and her friends started the Justice Battalion, which later became the Justice Society of America. But after the war, he spent more and more time in his tower and only came out very rarely. Meanwhile, Robin and I will track down anyone who has shown interest in seeking or obtaining this gem. Batman said that and went for the elevator with his protege following him. I'm also going to Atlantis. My friend has started searching for more information about the artifact in the old records, and even if your magician friend helps you, it's likely the city's archives have important information. Calder said that and also went for the elevator. As intriguing as meeting a sorcerer is, I have school. Wally said that and ran off. Roy just grunted and turned his back on them. Can I go too? It'll be the first time I've met a magic user besides Dio. Coriandar asked Diana. It seems that despite existing longer than Earth, Tamarin doesn't have any magicians or sorcerers, at least to the princess's knowledge. Sorry, sister, but Fate doesn't like strangers in his house, and I'm already risking a very unpleasant welcome by bringing Dio with me. Coriandar lowered her head in disappointment, and it's something she learned instinctively to make Dio reconsider any request she makes. Thank the gods that Dio doesn't have to handle this request. No need to be sad. I've got an idea. How about coming to Themyscira next week? That's good compensation. Coriandar seemed to accept the offer and smiled happily at Diana. After thanking her, she left the rooftop and left them alone. Now, I'm the one feeling jealous. Dio told her. Themyscira is a magical land with so much to learn within it. Unfortunately, there's a darn ancient law that says no man is welcome there. Dio should thank Hercules for that when he meets him. Naturally, there are some cases where this doesn't apply. The Amazon Queen has to say yes to any offer from an Olympian, but none of the Olympians like Dio's father very much, except for Hermes, who meets him a lot as he leads souls to the Underworld. The other exception is if Themyscira is under attack and in danger. Then, the Queen can reconsider the rule if a man comes to help. I know, Diana. I'm just kidding. Dio reassured her. I know that, but I really wish to show you the place where I was born. Diana said this while turning around and looking at the city skyline on the horizon. Chapter 50, Chapter 49. The island on which their teen tower was built isn't very large, just a few kilometers in length. The river has a path that leads to the door of the tower. Other than that, there is only well-maintained grass, a few trees, underground traps, and other safety measures. It doesn't matter how small the island is if it's not a great place to live. In fact, Dio has plans to make an underground just for himself, but that's for the future.
Is Dr. Fate very far away?
Dio asked while still looking at the sunset bathing the city's buildings on the horizon. The tower must be able to move like Zatanna's house, so it's an important question. Not very far at my top speed. Diana replied and then looked at Dio with a smile. It's not hard to carry you, but it slows me down a bit.
Unfortunately, you can't fly by yourself. Diana knows very well that Dio loves to fly and that he was trying to do it by himself, but not very successfully at the moment.
One of these days, Diana, I'll beat you in an aerial race, and we'll see who'll have the last laugh. Dio countered, which made her laugh. Diana quickly put her arm around Dio's body, took off very quickly, and left the teen tower behind. She flew high above the clouds to give him the view that he loved, then began to increase her speed, breaking the sound barrier and going faster and faster. After a few minutes, she dove. The place where they landed was very big, flat, and empty. Dio almost thought it was a golf course at first because the grass was so neatly maintained, but then he saw a city in the distance. It was a city with very old and traditional houses. Dio couldn't recognize the location. "Welcome to Salem, Dio," Diana said as she stood next to him. "Well, this is certainly the perfect place to put a magic tower."
"The tower is very well hidden."
Dio said this and looked at the empty space in front of him. Dio's eyes can see through magical illusions, just as he could see Zatanna's house.
Dio should be able to see the tower, but Fate is much more powerful and knowledgeable than Zatanna, with his thousands of years of accumulated experience in magic.
It's not unreasonable to think that he has a specific spell to prevent people with Dio's eyes from seeing his tower.
"It's not hidden. It's actually here yet,"
Diana said, which left Dio puzzled. "The tower is in another dimension. It appears here when cold, if its master wants to welcome us." Diana explained. "Do you think he'll help us?" Dio asked. "I don't know. I used to talk to Kent regularly in the past, but after his wife died, he shut himself off from the world, choosing to spend more and more time wearing his helmet. Fate was never very close to the old group. He was part of it out of convenience, so it's hard to know if he'll help us or not." Without saying more, Diana took a few steps ahead of him and shouted loudly, "Dr. Fate, we need to talk to you." There were no immediate changes, so they waited a bit. A huge tower appeared in front of them in a blink of an eye.
There was no bright flash or even a slight movement in the wind. It simply appeared as if it had always been there.
Dio can't think of a better way to describe Dr. Fate's tower than rustic. A rough gray stone tower built in the style of medieval architecture stood tall and was more than 15 stories high. There were no windows or doors that Dio could see. What's even more disturbing is the feeling it gives Dio. It's like he was facing a mountain, something that will never move by force.
"I think you'll be more impressed once we're inside the tower,"
Diana said as she walked toward the rough gray stone wall. When she was just inches away from hitting the rough gray stone wall, a golden Ankh symbol appeared on the wall in front of her. The master of this place uses the Ankh symbol, which is a golden cross with a loop at the top. Diana wasn't shocked by what happened, as she already knew it. She walked toward the symbol and disappeared. Of course, Dio followed her, and when he passed through the Ankh, he felt a sensation similar to when he walked in the shadows through teleportation. It lasted less than a second for the golden light to disappear, and he was faced with the most confusing sight of his life. "Now you can look, kid."
Dio heard a voice that was almost hard to hear. It was so distant, and Dio was very focused on trying to make sense of what he was seeing now.
All he can see in front of him are stairs. There are stairs to the left, stairs to the right, stairs above, stairs below, and stairs upside down. There are an infinite number of stairs at all angles and positions. The stairs are all the same size and lead to different rooms. This scene goes on infinitely. Dio couldn't really see the tower's wall. Instead, there was a massive black hole that completely captured his attention. Dio's full attention was fixed on the tiny blue point right in the center of the black hole, and the more he looked at it, the emptier his mind became, and then, "Diomedes!" Dio heard Diana's voice and was filled with concern, a little louder this time. As if Dio had just woken up after a long night's sleep, he blinked several times to wake up. "What happened?" Dio asked and rubbed his fingers over his eyes. This was Dr. Fate's doing.
"He didn't know you were gifted with the sight of truth, so you saw more than any mortal who visited this tower should or has seen so far, and you weren't ready for it."
The second voice Dio heard was strange, a combination of two different voices, one ancient and the other ancestral. Dio took his hand away from his face and looked around.
He saw that he was no longer in front of the stairs but in a big room.
The room had a red carpet on the floor, a lit fireplace on the north wall, tables and chairs set up like in a restaurant, and old paintings on the walls that looked like they were from medieval times.
Dio looked to the other side and saw Diana, who was looking at Dio with concern.
She wasn't alone, because beside her was the man who spoke to him earlier, Dr. Fate. He was slightly smaller than Diana but certainly intimidating. Dr. Fate wore the characteristic golden helmet without many details and a golden cape held by an amulet just below his neck, wearing gloves, a golden belt, and golden boots as well. The rest of his suit was all blue. It was an incredible suit, but it couldn't compare to the magic he exuded, much more than Zatanna had ever shown to Dio.
It was as if he were literally made of magic or connected to it. Zatanna also gave him this impression, but much lower than this person.
Forgive me, Dio.
I didn't know you'd be affected like this. Diana came over to him and looked all over his body, searching for anything wrong.
I'm fine, Diana, but can you explain how I got like this? Dio asked curiously.
He didn't see time passing at all. He kept looking at the same point. You just stood there and stared at the stairs without moving until Dr. Fate teleported us to him and did something to you.
Diana replied.
The eyes of truth can see the true nature of things. When you entered the tower, your level of ability was increased due to the high concentration of magic present here, and your eyes saw the true form of the tower.
Fate explained. The true nature or form? Are you talking about that black hole? Dio asked as he recalled his last vision. Is that what you saw?
Well, the sight of the power nexus of the Lord of Order appears differently to each who has the honor of glimpsing it.
Well, Dio never paid much attention to his eye ability. Until now, he thought the eyes of truth were only for seeing spirits and through illusions. However, Dr. Fate stated they are much more than that. Zatanna also doesn't seem to know about it, as she never told him anything, and Dio didn't actively search for information on this topic in her library. She also couldn't have read all the books in her house.
It was a mistake not to ask further. With that topic finished for now, Fate turned to Diana and asked, So, why have you come to seek the presence of Dr. Fate?
We need your help to tell us if you've ever heard of a magical artifact called the Amulet of Arion. Diana replied. And since you couldn't find the true owner, you've come to me.
Wait, Arion is alive?
Diana asked in surprise. Fate didn't respond immediately. He walked over to the 3 chairs near the fireplace and sat in one of them, then motioned for us to sit as well. Dio sat beside Diana, and he finally answered her question. Arion is a god and his life is infinite unless his power source or his body are destroyed.
Do you know where to find him?
Diana asked again. Chapter 51. Chapter 50. Not even Fate can locate a sorcerer within their place of power, at least one of their level. Dr. Fate replied. Place of power? She asked with confusion, and Dio answered that question. A place of power for a sorcerer or magician is like a domain just for them. In that place, their powers are enhanced, and they have total control over all parts within it. Dio explained it briefly and simply for her to understand. Dio can't even begin to try to make a place of power because it's too hard for him right now. Also, the location is very important. Dio has no idea where to put it. Dio could stay on the Titan's island, but he was not going to stay there forever, and moving a place of power is harder than making one from scratch. The apprentice summarized it well. All I can do at the moment is tell you what I know about the amulet. Fate confirmed. Fate moved his hands in front of his body, and a small golden ankh appeared in front of him. It dissolved into a golden mist and took the form of the Amulet of Arion. The amulet is nothing more than a small piece of something much larger, the Black Diamond, which is located in the dimension of the Dark World. This small piece can open a connection with that gem, making it a conduit for the boundless energy of that plane, but only a qualified sorcerer could do that. Fate explained. With another movement of his hands, the golden mist and image dissipated. Is the amulet useless if it's not used by a master of the mystical arts? Diana asked to seek confirmation of what had been said. Not completely. There are some powers in the amulet that even a mediocre sorcerer can use, but it can't access the energy of the Dark World.
So anyway, whoever possesses it will certainly cause trouble.
Diana said. Is there a way to locate it, Dr. Fate? Dio asked. Fate can try. There aren't many mystical artifacts from ancient Atlantis that can help us. The entire room disappeared, leaving only the chairs they were sitting on. They floated in a completely empty space until stars began to shine above their heads. Hundreds of them formed constellations very clearly, but none of them reminded Dio of the ones on Earth. Fate moved his hand as if the sky were a blackboard, and he was erasing it. In the center of the sky, the stars broke their formation and regrouped to form the image of a world map, marking the position of the largest and brightest star in that group. The location is revealed. Fate said dramatically. The guy seemed to love putting on a show. Dio didn't mind. It was quite surprising. After that, the stars went dark and left everything in darkness. The lights returned, and they were once again in the medieval room near the lit fireplace. Does this answer all your questions? Fate asked, and he already wanted to kick them out of his tower. Yes, thank you, Kent. Diana replied and stood up. It wasn't very subtle for her to call him Kent now. Diana may have been interested in seeing how Fate would react and possibly getting back in touch with an old friend. Kent Nelson might be Dr. Fate, but when he wears the helmet, it's the entity Nabu who controls his body. Kent Nelson is always pleased with your visits. Diana of Themyscira. He wanted you to know that. Dr. Fate replied, also getting up and walking to the fireplace and facing them.
I wish he could say that in person one day.
Diana tried once more.
That day should be decided by him alone.
Dr. Fate raised his hand once more, and Dio knew he was about to teleport them, so he stood up and asked before he did so.
One moment, Dr. Fate.
Fate paused with his hand pointed at them and waited for Dio to continue. Do you have any advice to help me on my path? Zatanna is an amazing teacher, but she couldn't guide Dio on his own path, as there haven't been any demigod children of Hades or sorcerers connected to the Underworld. Dio had to take advantage of any chance he got to get advice from a mage with thousands of years of experience. Fate cannot guide you on your own path, apprentice. But consider this. How can you use energy from another dimension without knowing its source? Before Dio could say anything else, everything disappeared. They were back on the grass outside the tower until they could no longer see it.
Dio, you are my apprentice, so promise me one thing.
Diana looked at me seriously.
Of course, what is it?
Dio asked with curiosity. In the future, as you grow as a sorcerer, don't start talking in codes like Fate. It really irritates me. Diana said she was not obviously joking.
I promise.
Great. Now let's head back to the Titan's tower. Diana held Dio, and they flew back home. While they were flying, Dio thought about Fate's words. It wasn't a complicated message. He clearly meant that he should visit the Underworld, and he's right. How can he use the aspects of the Underworld perfectly without even having seen them?
So, Dio was determined to put all his efforts into being able to visit the place where his father rules when this was over.
This will require a lot of preparation, as he was literally going to hell. First, Dio has to create a portal that can be open on Earth as well as in the Underworld, so he can move more easily between the two planes. This may be somewhat easy, as he had a strong connection with the Underworld. Then Dio needs to prepare some necessary items to survive against the enemies he will undoubtedly encounter. The fact that his father rules over the Underworld doesn't mean he will be safe there. In fact, he was likely to be even more chaste because he was his son, as many enemies of the gods were sent to the Underworld as punishment. He was still a little excited about the idea of going to the underground, even though he knew it was dangerous. It seems like the right thing to do.
We've arrived.
Diana said this and landed on the rooftop of the Titan's tower. Dio spent the rest of the short journey thinking about what to do, so he didn't even notice the time. They didn't see anyone waiting for us on the roof, and since it was night, those lazy people were probably either having dinner or in their rooms. They both walked to the elevator. Come meet us in the computer room. Batman's voice was heard through the console on the wall next to the rooftop elevator. When the door opened, they entered, and Dio pressed the button for the floor below, where Robin's cave is located. The elevator door opened, and he saw Batman sitting in the chair in front of several screens displaying various data and documents in various languages. Dio could recognize German, Italian, and Russian, but with his limited knowledge, he couldn't translate them perfectly. Did he help? Batman asked without even looking at them. Dr. Fate helped us more than expected.
We even managed to locate the artifact.
Diana replied. Great, because we found out who stole it. Batman pressed a key on the keyboard, and all the screens changed to the same image. The picture didn't show much of the room where it was taken. It was mostly about the people kneeling in front of it and worshipping something while dressed like blood-red medieval monks.
A cult?
Diana asked. They call themselves the Church of Blood. Batman told her. There are many, many secret organizations in the DC universe. The vast majority of them are like the Church of Blood, a bunch of fanatical lunatics. At least Dio has to be thankful that he has some knowledge of them, or he wouldn't know the seriousness they represent.
Are they on your radar?
Diana asked. Yes, but I haven't obtained any proof connecting them to any criminal activity so far. In fact, they have a reputation for benevolence. That complicates things. Indeed, to make matters worse, they are a global organization with wide-reaching influence. A lot of their members have high-level positions in businesses, universities, governments, and the news media, but they all act quietly to hide this. As soon as we go after them, the public opinion will turn against us, and if their influence is as powerful as you say, they could make the government order us to leave their country. Diana said. The League of Justice doesn't work for any government or country, but they do obey their laws.
That's why we'll go in stealthily.
Batman said this while standing up and looking at Dio. You want us to infiltrate the cult as spies to steal the amulet, don't you? Dio asked and already understood where this was going. Robin and I have tracked all of the Church of Blood's transportation methods, including both legal and illegal ones. We've identified 10 locations around the globe. With some research, we could narrow it down to 4. Now that we know where the amulet is, we no longer need to split the team to investigate each one. Diana deduced the rest.
Right.
Batman confirmed.
Where's Robin?
Dio asked. Informing the team and preparing them.
You should do the same. Dio's first official mission, and he has to deal with a cult full of fanatical lunatics to recover a magical artifact. Chapter 52. Chapter 51. Kaznia is the perfect country for those who like the medieval. Of course, tourists will have to ignore the continuing civil war between King Gustav and the resistance seeking to end his reign. A war that has already killed over 10,000 soldiers and 20,000 civilians. It's difficult to distinguish between the resistance and King Gustav because both groups don't care about collateral damage. Besides that, it's actually a beautiful country. The situation in this small nation has led to the rise of humanitarian organizations like Doctors Without Borders. Unfortunately, the target of their mission is also here. The Church of Blood is utilizing the misery in this area to increase its followers. They're doing a very good job at it too. They have provided food, shelter, and healthcare to the people more than any other organization involved in this cause. This has led to a growth in the number of believers every day. Next, Dio said, with a welcoming smile on his face to the people waiting in line. Dio had learned a few words in Russian over the past 3 days. It might be time to learn a translation spell. They are in a small village with only 100 houses, just a few kilometers from Kaznia city. The recent fighting between the army and the rebels destroyed all of the houses. The only building that remained standing after this battle was a small church in the center of the village. This is where the Church of Blood has established its headquarters. Unfortunately, only members can enter it, and the others have to stay in numerous tents around the church. They have been here for 3 days. Robin created a good background story for Dio and Roy. They are part of a certain non-profit organization. After realizing things had gotten worse, they decided to leave the country. Roy and Dio chose to stay without any support because they wanted to help. They then helped at the church after seeing the good work they were doing. It was a good backstory, and with Robin's skills and equipment, he literally created a life for them with complete documents, all in just a few hours. The other team members had to stay out of the infiltration because of their age and appearance. Only Roy and Dio could pass as adults. The next person in line was a child, not more than 10 years old. She was a beautiful girl with green eyes and blonde hair. Just like the others, her clothes were worn, and she had no expression on her face. At the moment, Dio is responsible for distributing meals. Dio was to the east of the church and in front of a large iron pot. Dio took a ladle filled with soup and filled the old iron plate of the girl. Dio won't deny that the Church of Blood is helping them, but the amount of food is quite short. Dio distributed it and gave a larger portion to the children and the elderly. Next, Dio said with a smile to the girl who went to the iron table and took a piece of hard bread. This is a lunch meal, a weak soup, and a piece of hard bread. It took half an hour, but all 200 people in the village had their plates full and sat at long wooden tables in a school cafeteria-style setting. When Dio was done with his task, he took off his apron and took the empty pot to the area where dishes are washed. He left it with the person in charge and told them he was going to rest. After leaving, Dio walked toward the tents and crossed a small part of the destroyed village along the way. Dio wasn't joking when he said this place was medieval. The houses in this village were built with stones and thatched roofs, and everything was either burned or demolished, which left all the streets filled with debris in his way. Dio greeted some members of the church who were cleaning up this debris with a smile on his face. There were men and women who wore red robes that covered their entire bodies. Dio doesn't know how none of them have had a stroke. The tents are in the cleanest part of the village, one after the other, almost glued together to fit everyone. They were basic tents, with a cloth stretched in the middle and tied at all 4 corners with pieces of wood. The interior didn't have much space, just enough for 2 military beds, and even then, entire families slept inside them. Dio entered his tent and sat on his bed. Dio already saw Roy sitting on his bed in front of him, and he was looking at him. They were hiding who they were so as not to reveal their identities. Roy was wearing a black wig, different from his natural red hair, and contact lenses to change the color of his eyes. Dio was also in disguise. He only needed to make some changes to his camouflage device, changing his hair to blonde, and his eyes turned blue due to the contact lenses. Roy didn't even greet Dio. He nodded and took something from under his military bed. Dio did the same. This was where we kept our communicators. This country is relatively backward, but the Church of Blood is not. On the first day here, Robin detected a device blocking communications. Luckily, its range was limited. Dio put the small communicator in his ear and gently tapped it to turn it on. Report in. Robin said it from the other side. So far, everything is going as planned. I've completed my objective. Now, we just need to find out if the rookie doesn't mess up his cover. Roy reported first, and he didn't forget a chance to criticize Dio. I've completed the objective as well. When are we moving? Dio asked. We're all set. We'll take action tonight. Robin responded. When they arrived here, the plan was not to stay for long. It was just to check where the amulet was, steal it, and maybe recapture Mammoth.
Imagine everyone's surprise when they discovered there was a massive underground base beneath the village. This changed things. Of course they thought about giving up. They couldn't attack a peaceful organization that was helping people suffering from a war. They would be attacked by every government. The other countries didn't care about this small country, but they would jump at any chance to get a piece of the league. But when Dio set foot in the village, he realized they couldn't run. The reason was that he felt the magic in the ground. The church was definitely doing something big using the artifact, so now they had to retrieve the amulet, which was well protected in the underground base, without getting caught. When they went underground, they wouldn't have to hide anymore because the church wouldn't be able to ask for justice without letting the cops know about their secret hiding place. After some thought, Robin came up with a plan. In fact, he expanded a bit on the original plan of infiltrating the church as double agents. Now Roy and Dio had to prepare everything for the attack, while the other members dug a tunnel to the base, with Kid Flash, Aqualad, and Starfire using their powers. They could do it in half an hour, but since they couldn't draw attention, everything was done as slowly and safely as possible. At the agreed time? Dio asked to confirm the time. This is technically his first trip globally, and he was still a bit confused about the time zone. Midnight. Local time. Robin out. Robin responded. Dio takes off his earpiece and places it back where it belongs, and Roy in front of him does the same. Well, let's see how you mess up your first mission, rookie. Roy taunted him again. Dio took a few deep breaths to calm himself. Roy has always been like this with him, but sharing a room made his patience wear thin quickly, so now he was in the red zone. You know, Roy, I'm really getting tired of you. Dio finally said. Oh, really? So, what are you going to do, rookie? Roy asked as he crossed his arms and looked at him. When this mission is over, both of us are going to the back of the tower, and then we'll have a conversation, just you and me. The back of the tower is an empty space, but he got the message. Well, I guess it's time then. Roy responded, stood up, and left the tent. Dio took a few more deep breaths to calm himself and get up as well. Dio has more work to do until midnight than just serving food today. Dio left his tent and walked calmly through the scattered debris on the ground toward the infirmary, which is nothing more than a gigantic tent where most of the injured are lying on the floor because there's no space for so many military beds. While he was on his way, Dio ran into some troops in green uniforms who had weapons wrapped around their shoulders. There's no reaction from them when Dio moves out of the way. They hired these soldiers to keep them safe, and the church pays them all the money. They're only paid to leave everyone alone because the church wants to look good. So the church can get more people without having to worry that they'll tell the king. Not that Dio thinks the king would do anything if he did find out, but he never knows. Chapter 53. Chapter 52. Dio arrived at the largest tent in the village, and the scene almost made him sick. There are injured people lying all over the place, and most of them are screaming in pain and rolling on the ground as they don't have many medical supplies. There is blood everywhere. They tried to keep the place as clean as they could, but it was hard to do without the right tools. There are many kinds of injuries here, but gunshot wounds are the most common. Dio had no medical training beyond the basic first aid he received from Diana and the ARGUS personnel, but that's already quite useful here. They have one doctor who is over 50 years old and 2 nurses. The doctor was born in this small village before it was attacked, and his previous medical concerns were more common infections than gunshot wounds. He's doing the best he can, working tirelessly for days and only stopping when he's nearly passing out. Dio walked among the wounded on the ground and helped as much as he could. They change bandages using old cloth rags since they don't have gauze. Before using them, they soak them in vodka, which is the one thing that isn't in short supply in the city. Dio felt bad when he saw so much pain. Dio can't do anything to change the situation in this small country, even with all his powers, and no one else is going to help them either. Kaznia is located in Eastern Europe, in the Balkan Mountains. There are natural defenses all around the country. The poor location and the lack of useful and valuable resources in the country mean that no neighboring countries try to help in any way. They always say that changing this would be against the law as an excuse. However, they all know that if this country had a large reserve of oil, other nations would already have their soldiers marching in to provide assistance, prevent further deaths, and restore order. That's what they would call it. After being here for 3 days, Dio really wants to help them. But there's nothing to be done since not even the League of Justice can change the overall situation. They could come here and remove the king from the throne, but whoever takes over would probably be the military leader, who is also not a good person. The rebel leader would have a greater chance of seizing power. The problem is that he sees anyone who is not under his control as an enemy, which is why the rebels are also harming the people. There's no good candidate with the status to take power and genuinely help the people. Dio even considered the princess the only heir to the throne, but according to Robin's research, the girl is just a spoiled teenager who spends most of her time at parties on the other side of the world without caring about her people. Dio can't do anything. He wanted to help change the overall situation, but he didn't have the power, status, or money to do that. He was going to help in any way he could so that at least one cancer on this land could be removed before it grew too much. After all, Dio highly doubts that the Church of Blood will act here after their little invasion. After helping as much as Dio could all day, the time was finally approaching. The curfew requires everyone except soldiers to be in their tents by 8 p.m. At midnight, the soldiers around the village should be sleepy. Robin had already given Dio a black suit that looked like it was made for a ninja at his tent. They need to do their best not to be recognized, as this task is still a secret. Otherwise, the church can create many problems for them, so Dio will wear this until they get underground. Dio looked to the side and saw that Roy was also ready. He's wearing a black outfit similar to Dio's with a black bow on his back. Roy then crouched to pick up the communicator and put it in his ear, and then it's time for the mask covering his face, which Dio was also wearing. They exit the tent as quietly as possible. Roy immediately ran like a good ninja, doing a great job of using the shadows as allies. Dio just uses his shadow movement and soon finds himself leaning against an almost destroyed wall. This is the meeting point, one of the few buildings in the village that still has some standing walls. They chose this house because it belonged to the mayor, and it's the only one with standing walls near the church that isn't heavily guarded. The first problem with the invasion is the location. The church they were trying to enter is right in the center of the city, with nothing around it. The lights and guards in the bell tower will see anything that tries to get close. The second problem is the cameras, and the third problem is the 10 Church of Blood members patrolling the perimeter, but there's a time gap between their rounds. After waiting alone for 5 minutes, Roy entered the ruined house and leaned his back against the wall. "How much time?" Roy asked in a low voice, referring to the patrol time. 1 minute. Dio replied. 1 minute later, the east wall of the church is unguarded. Dio touched Roy's shoulder and said it in a low voice. "Επικαλούμε τη βασιλιά του βασιλιά Λίθητα. I summon the forgetfulness of King Lethe." A thin layer of milky white energy then surrounded both their bodies completely. They then jumped over the old brick wall and ran across the field towards the church. The spell he just used is focused on using the part of the river of forgetfulness. In short, the guards and even the cameras won't be able to see them now. It's not like they were invisible. They can still see them, but they simply forget what they saw as soon as their eyes see them. It's the perfect spell to go hidden. Of course, it has limitations, and the energy consumption increases with the number of eyes Dio has to affect, which is why he waited for the patrol to pass. In a few seconds, they reach their destination, and once again, they press against the white-painted wooden wall of the church. The east wall is right under the bell tower, and it was their current target. Roy pulled his bow from his back and put a black arrow in a string, then shot it high into the air. The arrow had a cable attached to it, which was stretched as its tip hit the roof of the tower. At this point, Dio's spell had already been cancelled, so they needed to act quickly. Roy began climbing the one-story church wall. Roy easily reached the top of the tower in seconds. It was at this moment that one of the guards approached this wall, looked down, and froze after seeing someone climbing in this way. Roy didn't freeze. Instead, he punched the guard in the face, which caused the guard to fall backward. Dio knew there were 2 guards in the tower, so he crouched on his knees and jumped inside without any trouble. When Dio got inside the bell tower, he saw that the second guard was picking up a gun from the ground while his back was turned away from him. Dio quickly moved and struck him in the neck using a technique Etta Candy, Diana's best friend and the most skilled and entertaining spy he had ever seen, had taught him. When the guard fell unconscious, Roy also entered. Dio looked around. There wasn't much in this small tower with just 2 chairs, a radio, and 2 guards wearing the church's red uniforms. The reason they chose to enter through the tower was due to the trapdoor on the floor, which leads to the staircase that goes to the back of the church, and it should be empty. The location is very close to the entrance of the tunnel. Before opening the trapdoor, Roy tapped his ear communicator and said, "We're entering." This is the signal for the others to invade through the entrance they created. With the signal given, Dio opened the trapdoor, and an old wooden staircase appeared. Dio was the first to go down, but he didn't descend the stairs. He simply jumped. Dio held onto the walls on both sides with his arms and legs fully extended just before he hit the ground. This slowed him down and stopped the noise. Roy used the same rope he used to climb to the tower to descend, and without making any noise, he was on the ground. They walked over to the door at the end of the corridor they had fallen into and opened it. They then walked into another dimly lit hallway made of old wood. It should lead them directly to the back of the church. Chapter 54. Chapter 53. They crossed the corridor with his super hearing turned up to the highest, and he realized they were getting closer to the enemy. The corridor they were in was on the left side of the central part of the church. Dio crouched and looked through the window. Dio saw the whole church set up with long wooden benches lined up next to each other. There are people in red robes sitting on them and staring at the altar like zombies. There was a woman at the altar who was different from the others. She was dressed as a nun in a different red outfit with many tiny details. She was the official leader of the church in this place, or at least the leader of the part that was in charge of all the important humanitarian tasks. Dio spoke with her twice. She didn't give her name and introduced herself as Mayhem. In one of those meetings, she tried to recruit Dio for the cult after seeing his work, and Dio accepted. However, she seemed suspicious about it. Dio might not have seemed sincere, so she didn't bring it up again. Mayhem was reading a book with red leather covers for her new initiates. It's unclear who they serve, and their faith is confusing, so Dio doesn't pay much attention to her words. Instead, Dio counted all the armed guards scattered around the room and watched over the initiates. There are 10 armed men. After counting, Roy and Dio continued their path and turned right, reaching the end of the corridor, where they saw a closed door. If Robin is right, the entrance to the tunnels is here. Dio stood next to the door, gripped the doorknob, confirmed that it was not locked, and looked back. When Roy looked at Dio, he nodded and held out his bow with an arrow already in it. Dio opened the door, and Roy immediately entered. Dio followed him and saw 2 armed guards in the room. Roy's shock arrow has already struck one of them in the neck, and his bow hit the other in the head. He's certainly an idiot, but his skills are good. With both guards down, Dio looked around the room. There's nothing in it, just a large hole in the ground. It was dug in the shape of a square, and they even built a dirt staircase inside. This construction was definitely not a simple tunnel. It looked more like an entrance to an underground crypt. As the room was empty, Dio returned to the door they had entered and closed it. Then he placed his hand on it and whispered softly, "Επικαλούμε το κρύο της λήψης του ποταμού και ως αίτιες." I summoned the cold of the river Cocytus. A fine black mist covered the entire door and froze it. The ice expanded and connected with the wall, so when the chaos started, they'd have some time before the enemy from above could attack them from behind. "Robin, we're ready to descend." Dio said this after touching his communicator, but didn't receive a response. He warned that the tunnels might make their communications unstable. "Let's go." Speedy said that and entered the hole in the ground. The inside of the tunnel was surprisingly big, nearly 2 meters high and 3 meters wide. It was well dug, with large wooden sticks placed on all sides to prevent collapse. The area was also well lit by electric lamps spread on the ceiling. Dio was impressed by the speed of the Blood Church's construction. According to Robin, they arrived in the country 20 days ago and have already built something of this size without drawing attention. As they walked slowly through the tunnel, the sensation of magic Dio felt from above became increasingly intense. Dio doesn't know how to describe the magic here other than as chaos and evil. "Which way?" Speedy asked quietly from behind him. The tunnel was split into left and right paths, and according to Robin's analysis, it's easy to get lost down here. Fortunately, Dio has a natural compass. All he needed to do was choose the direction where the magic sensation was strongest. "Left," Dio said, and they continued to run. It took a while to reach the end of the tunnel at their cautious speed to avoid any potential traps. "There are 4. Speedy whispered to him, pressed against the wall, and observed what was around the bend using the reflection from the tip of one of his arrows. Dio closed his eyes for a moment to sense the magic in the air. They were close, and these 4 must be the last guards before the main room. "I'll go ahead," Dee told him. Speedy knocked an arrow without objecting. Dio had been puzzled by his behavior since the beginning of this infiltration. He hasn't made any stupid comments or fought his suggestions. It could be because Dio said they would solve everything when they returned to the tower. Since Dio's back was against the wall and the 4 guards were facing them, he couldn't charge them straight on. However, Dio used the same magic as before because he didn't know where the shadow movement would take him, even though it was very tiring. "Επικαλούμε τη βασιλιά του βασιλιά Λίθητα." I summoned the forgetfulness of King Lethe. The same thin layer of milky white energy surrounded him, but this time only him. Dio stepped out from behind the wall and faced the 4 guards who were protecting a 3-meter-tall wooden door. The door was antique, incredibly old, and even carved with patterns and letters in a language he didn't recognize. The 4 armed men in red outfits stood side by side, holding rifles and staring straight ahead without blinking. Dio stood right in front of them, but with the power of forgetfulness, it didn't matter. So Dio attacked. He had to be quick. Dio hit the first guard in the throat to prevent him from shouting. The second guard found it odd and looked at his friend. Dio struck him in the nose. The third guard acted swiftly and aimed his rifle in Dio's direction, even though he couldn't see him. But before he could fire, Dio drew a military knife from the second guard's vest and threw it at the third guard. The knife traveled through the air, hitting the third guard's forehead at the back of the night, and he fell to the ground. The fourth guard was opening his mouth to shout, and just as Dio was about to use the shadow movement, an arrow went into the side of his face. When the arrow exploded, it covered the guard's head in solidifying foam. Dio punched the foam off his head to keep him from suffocating. Quick, clean, and accurate. That was Dio's assessment of his attack with Speedy's assistance. Unfortunately, Dio didn't have time to brag further. He headed straight for the door, but he stopped before opening it when he noticed something. "What happened?" Speedy asked from behind him. "I can't hear anything behind this door. Absolutely nothing," Dio replied to him. "Do you think it's some kind of soundproofing?" Roy suggested. "I think it's a silence spell or this door." Dio opened the door slowly to avoid making noise, just enough for the two of us to enter. After they crossed, the sounds of worship that spells had silenced emerged. On the other side of the door, there were two guards, but they were facing forward and didn't notice them. They both attacked at the same time and took them down. They then looked around to see what was happening around them. The room they were in had ridiculous dimensions. Almost 10 meters in height, 20 in width, and 6 in depth. They were at the highest point, and everything was happening in the lower part of the room. Dio lost count of how many people were kneeling, worshipping the man in front of them. The man was dressed in red attire with a long black cape and wore a strange helmet made of bones that obscured his face. He might have been Brother Blood, the leader of the cult. Brother Blood held an ancient black book and was reading aloud. The unpleasant magic Dio was feeling here increased with every word he spoke. He wasn't alone. In addition to his followers, their friend Mammoth was on the other side of the room with an African woman who was bald and wearing a long blue dress. "Robin, we've got an Indiana Jones situation here," Speedy reported from his side. Dio didn't immediately get the reference, but that's when he saw what was behind Brother Blood. A woman wearing a white cloak that covered her entire body and was hanging from the ceiling by a chain around her waist was over a bubbling luminous green pool of water. Dio couldn't recognize the woman, but he recognized the pool. The Church of Blood was performing a sacrifice using the Lazarus Pit. Chapter 55. Chapter 54. The Lazarus Pit is truly alarming. Literally, it can heal any wound, revive, thus extending life, and even resurrect the recently dead. They will come back to life as zombies if the Lazarus Pit is used to bring back someone who has been dead for too long. These are the positive aspects of the pit, but there is no such thing as a free lunch in the world. It wants something in return, which can range from crazy behavior to changes in mental state and personality. In any case, those who bathe in the pit will undoubtedly have to pay the price. Other than the stupid people who go into the pit on purpose, knowing or not, the woman hanging above it will have a worse outcome if she falls into it. The person who goes into the pit must be injured physically or mentally in order to use its healing abilities. It is a certain death for anyone who goes into it in good shape. "Any luck?" Dio asked while crouching in the upper part of the chamber where Speedy and Dio were. "No, Robin isn't responding," Speedy said while looking ahead. With an army of fanatics in their way, along with Mammoth and his new friend, they are the only ones who can save a woman who is hanging 4 meters above the ground. "Should we wait?" Dio asked. "Until the last moment, and if they don't show up, we'll act." Speedy agreed while knocking an arrow on his bow. During their brief conversation, the ritual conducted by the priest, in front of the faithful, continued. The white woman hanging by a chain squirmed more as she tried to get free, and the pit of green, bubbling water behind him seemed to be getting more active with every word he read from his book. After 5 minutes, the faithful in front of the priest knelt and placed their heads on the ground. "That's good for us," Speedy commented beside him and watched that. Then, Brother Blood reaches behind him and grabs something with one hand while holding the book. Dio recognized the gem stolen from the photos he saw. It was the amulet of Arion, a hand-sized red ruby. While holding the book and the amulet, which started to shine with a bright red light, Brother Blood raised his head and shouted with a voice filled with joy. "We are close, my brothers. Our master is coming. I can feel it." Brother Blood could be right, as the waters of the pit were now boiling, and the ground began to tremble slightly. "Speedy, shoot that gem now." Dio said it as seriously as he could. The reason he asked Speedy to shoot the amulet was because he understood its crucial importance in the ritual. Brother Blood was not a wizard or sorcerer, and his summoning ritual seems to be very powerful. It needs something to power it, and the amulet, which is linked to a magical realm, is the perfect thing to use. "If we attack, they'll release the woman," Speedy observed. "One of the cult members is right next to the chain that's anchored to the wall, ready to release it at the right moment of the ritual. I can save her, but we have to do it at the same time," Dio replied. Speedy nodded and stood while knocking an arrow. "Whenever you're ready," Speedy said. Dio touches his pendant, and a sword with a black blade appears on his back. After taking a few deep breaths, he stood up and gazed directly at the woman suspended. "Now!" Dio shouted. Dio uses shadow movement at the same time Speedy releases the arrow. Dio quickly pulled out his sword, cut the top part of the chain, and freed the woman as he appeared next to her in the air. Before she could fall, Dio caught her and wrapped his arm around her waist. While still in mid-air, Dio glances at Brother Blood for a moment. The arrow has hit his hand, and the amulet is in the air. Dio used shadow movement again to return to where he was next to Speedy. From there, it would be easy to defend her and retreat. But Dio appears in the wrong place, right in front of Mammoth and the bald woman who's looking at him with interest, her hands enveloped in a light blue energy. She's a sorcerer. The woman Dio was holding under his arm squirms in an attempt to make him release her. That woke him up, and he took advantage of everyone's shock and used shadow movement again. Dio knows it's a risky move because the sorcerer has a spell to change his destination, but this time, he hasn't set a destination. He just thinks of going as far away from her as possible. It is very risky because he might get stuck inside a wall, but she interferes with him before he can get very far. Unfortunately, Dio's destination isn't much better than inside a wall. He reappears in the middle of the cultists. They disrupted the ritual. Make them pay for their blasphemy. Brother Blood shouted and pointed at him. Dio had to jump to avoid getting buried under all the people who were attacking him from all sides. In mid-air, Dio looked to his left and saw Mammoth, who had also jumped towards him. Dio throws the rescued woman towards Speedy so that she avoids injury from the impact. At the same moment, Dio was hit by Mammoth's strong and powerful body, which sent me flying to the other side of the room and smashing into the rough stone wall, which caused the whole place to shake. Mammoth is on top of Dio on the ground, but Dio twists his body to the right to escape him. He then gets up and touches his pendant, which his ninja clothes are replaced by his armor, and his appearance returns to normal. You! Mammoth immediately recognizes him. Me! Dio knew it would be better to keep his identity hidden, but there's no way to defeat Mammoth without using everything he has. Dio looks behind Mammoth and sees 2 arrows that were fired from above. One of them heads toward the cultists and explodes in the air above them, which releases a red smoke that falls upon them. The effect is quick. They start covering their eyes and screaming. Dio can smell the pepper spray in the air. The second arrow changes direction and misses Brother Blood. He's trying to get the amulet again. Speedy informs him through their communication. It was a mistake. Dio should have tried to get the amulet too, but things happened too fast. Seeing the situation Dio was in now, the chances of succeeding would have been slim. Mammoth didn't give him a chance to respond to Speedy. He kicked him, and Dio moved his body to the side, which caused his thick leg to sink into the tunnel wall. Dio placed his hand on the lower part of his leg and pushed with all his strength. Mammoth does a somersault in the air and lands on top of some cultists. Dio hoped he didn't hurt them too much in the process. Ignoring Mammoth as he gets up, Dio jumps and lands in the middle of the panicked cultists. Dio jumped once more and landed between Speedy and the woman, who was still in chains and lying on the ground. Can you retrieve the amulet with a grappling arrow or something? Dio asks Speedy, who is firing multiple arrows to prevent Brother Blood from reaching the amulet. However, Brother Blood is not harmless. The arrows are not only intended to prevent him from touching the amulet, but also to take him out of the fight. He is an expert at dodging them, which is suspicious, and Dio can feel magic in the air. At least this is slowing him down. It's impossible to get the amulet while he's close. Speedy responded. I'll get it then, Dio said. Dio glances to the side and sees that the cultists have recovered enough to start climbing the stairs leading to them, and those are the only stairs. Unbelievers! Heretics! Demons! They shouted. Dio can't let them come up here, so he grabs his shield and holds it out in front of him. Dio then charges down the stairs and changes into a bowling ball, which knocks down the pins and scatters them all over the place. When Dio reaches the bottom of the stairs, the people are too surprised to try climbing again. That's when Mammoth grabs Dio's body and brings him closer to his face. Let me thank you for the shoulder wound you gave me, Mammoth said while holding his arm with his other hand, and then he pulled it. Ah! Dio's shoulder was dislocated, and he screamed in pain. Dio was about to use his strongest spell to attack him because of the pain when he saw Speedy fall behind him and carefully wrap his bow around Mammoth's neck and pull hard. This took Mammoth by surprise, and he released him onto the ground. Dio grabs his shoulder with his good hand and pulls it back into place with all his strength. It's not a good method for treating this kind of injury, but his natural regeneration will only kick in once the bone is in the right place. Phew cuck. When the bone returns to its place, Dio closes his mouth to avoid screaming in pain. Dio stood up, picked up his sword, and stood. Speedy is still holding on to the bow around Mammoth's neck, so he is running back and forth while trying to shake Speedy off. There's no time to waste. They are being surrounded once again. Chapter 56. Chapter 55. Dio put his shield and sword on his back and ran towards them when Mammoth was facing Dio. Dio jumped and said, Epikalume ti dynami tu Sisyphus. I summon the power of Sisyphus. With new strength surging through his body, Dio landed a powerful uppercut to his chin, which caused his face to stretch upwards. Then he jumps and gripping his head with both hands, pulls it downward, delivering a knee strike. At that moment, Speedy released the bow, and Dio pulled his head back again. While Mammoth was on his back, Dio raised his arms above his head, crossed his fingers, and slammed them down hard on the back of Mammoth's head. Boom! The sound of his body hitting the ground made everything shake. Dio pulled out his sword again because he knew that wasn't enough to stop him. Just as Dio was about to thrust it into his shoulder again, the bald woman finally joined the fight and sent a burst of blue energy flying at Speedy. Dio didn't throw Mammoth's body away and let Speedy hit him so that Speedy wouldn't get hurt. Dio takes a few steps back and places Speedy on the ground, where he prepares himself to continue the fight. Speedy has somehow lost his bow and taken something from his belt, which expands into a new green bow. That hurt a bit, Mammoth said as he stood up from the ground. Dio's previous attack only made his nose bleed. I might have underestimated his resilience. Next time, I won't make the same mistake and will go all out. Poor boys. Luck certainly isn't on your side, the bald woman remarks while standing beside Mammoth. That's enough of your lousy puns, Jinx. Let's finish them off, Mammoth retorted. Now it makes sense why Speedy's arrows and teleportation weren't working properly. From what Dio remembers from the most recent comics and cartoons, Jinx is an expert in probability-altering magic, a unique and irritating branch of magic to fight. Dio read a bit about probability magic in Zatanna's library. After all, who wouldn't want magical luck on their side? However, Dio has zero talent for this branch of magic, so he didn't study too deeply into the subject. Nevertheless, Dio does know the weakness of a sorcerer like her. Trum. Before they can respond, the ground shakes. Dio's attention is drawn back to the center of the room, where Brother Blood holds the amulet and smiles while reciting incantations from his book. Looking back, Dio sees some cultists carrying the sacrifice toward him while the others form a barrier in front of them to prevent their interference. What a terrible situation we've found ourselves in, Dio muttered. I don't like to swear much, but this situation wanted me to curse. Speedy just nodded, and Dio retrieved his sword and shield. I'll take the big guy, Dio said. I'll deal with the sorceress. Speedy agreed. Dio makes his move while Speedy fires 2 arrows in a quick row. However, Speedy shoots Mammoth. Instead of Jinx, Dio changed his course and went toward Jinx. This really confuses their enemies since they heard their conversation. Dio didn't expect Speedy to do the same as him. When Dio was about a meter away from Jinx, she finally took initiative and fired an eldritch explosion in his direction. Dio put his shield in front of his body for complete protection and kept advancing. An eldritch explosion is something often used by magic users. It's nothing more than a concentrated beam of pure mystical energy that hasn't been altered by spells to take another form. It's a bit crude compared to true magic, but it's very effective for direct damage. It's usually used by practitioners or people with less experience because most spellcasters can't afford to waste magical energy. Jinx is definitely the second one, even though she's a little more skilled than him. As Dio approached her against the disappearing fire, he took another step, and the ground beneath his foot cracked, which sank a few centimeters into the floor. There is no doubt that probability magic is very annoying. Unfortunately, she can't make the ceiling fall on him and end the fight, but bad luck can still slow him down. In that case, all Dio has to do is act faster than she can cast her spells. Dio stops his advance, and her eldritch energy still surrounds his body. She's standing there, and Dio takes a knee, which surprises her as she wasn't expecting him to stop. Mammoth, who took a hit from an arrow but was unharmed, makes the decision to pursue him. Dio must have really annoyed him with his previous attack. When he's inches away from Dio, he takes a sudden leap against the flow of Jinx's magic, which is decreasing in power. This unexpected move leaves Mammoth stumbling as Dio finds himself face to face with Jinx. Dio thrust and aimed for her shoulder. Jinx quickly raised her hand, but her eldritch had already stopped. A blue aura appeared around her palm and then around Dio's sword. Dio's attack, which was aimed right at her shoulder, changed somehow. The sword pierced her shoulder along the edge instead of piercing her. But Dio didn't give up. When she took a step to his right while trying to distance herself, Dio spun his body and hit her chest with the front of his shield, which made her roll away on the ground. Then Dio stepped forward and dodged Mammoth's blow that came at him. After dodging, Dio jumped and did a somersault over his head. Mammoth tries to grab him but fails, and Dio lands behind him. Dio was about to hit him with a powerful attack when he noticed that his back was covered in arrows that were stuck in his body. Dio doesn't know what Speedy's plan is, but he certainly wouldn't waste so many arrows knowing that Mammoth has a certain degree of invulnerability. So Dio gave up on hitting his back and cut his knees. Not enough to sever his legs but enough to make him kneel. Ha-wea! Mammoth screamed and fell to his knees. Dio's sword has magical powers that make it perfect for dealing with powerful beings like him. It's as easy to cut him as it is to cut a human. It's possible that Mammoth would already be dead if Dio didn't care about morals. Dio was still on the ground, and he tried to get up. Then his body suddenly stiffened while his hair stood, and his body started shaking. Dio tried to understand what was happening until he realized that the arrows stuck in his back were sparking. Dio looked back and saw Speedy holding a small device in his hand and smiling at the sight of Mammoth trembling. It seemed like victory was close. Dio sees that one of the arrows suddenly catches fire, and the flames spread to the others, which destroys them and releases Mammoth from his torment. Dio looked to the left and saw Jinx with one knee on the ground while her hand pointed in his direction. Jinx's once sleek blue dress was covered in dust, and she had some bruises and wounds on her body from his last attack. Chapter 57. Chapter 56. I should have hit you harder, Dio said to her. Yes, you should have, Jinx replied while smiling as she stood up. Throw her into the well. There is even more pressure when Brother Blood yells, and everyone's attention is drawn to the front, where the cultists already have the prisoner in front of the well, and Lazarus is bubbling with excitement. Dio was about to risk using the shadow movement to get to them and save her when the Mammoth grabbed him by the neck and lifted him off the ground. Dio got distracted. Dio ignored Mammoth and looked at the horror show about to begin in front of him. Brother Blood is in the center of the stage with a book in one hand and the amulet shining brightly in the other, and the cultists are raising the prisoner above their heads to throw her into water. Throw her! Brother shouted again with joy. Boom! But there's an explosion on the wall next to where the woman and the cultists were. The small rock fragments that flew against them were enough to make them fall to the ground, which saved the prisoner. After a while, a voice from the dust was something familiar. Sorry for the delay, guys, but these tunnels are more complicated than we thought, Robin said while revealing himself from the dust, with the rest of them behind him and all of them in their hero suits. It's about time. Speedy yelled in response and fired an arrow into Mammoth's arm. The arrow explodes, a small explosion strong enough to make him let Dio go. Dio heard Robin's voice as he moved away. Starfire and Aqualad, help them. Starfire flew with her hair, surrounded by pure energy, and punched Mammoth in the face, which sent him flying to the other side of the chamber. The stain made me a little angry, Starfire said while looking at him and smiling. No need to explain, Dio said and defended against another attack from Jinx. Kid Flash, take the prisoner and get her out of here. Robin continued to give orders. I'm on it, Kid Flash replied while already running toward the hostage on the ground, picking her up and running in their direction. When he got to the stairs that led to the door where they were and tried to leave, his body hit an invisible wall that stood between the door and the exit. What was that? Kid Flash shouted as he got up from the ground. Magic, Aqualad replied while entering the fight and hitting Mammoth with a water whip. Speedy and Dio had no problem entering the room, so the spell must only prevent someone from fleeing or be more likely to prevent the hostage from escaping. Kid, break the chains, Dio shouted to him. There was nothing with her except the white dress and the veil covering her entire body, apart from the chains, which could be enchanted. Dio saw Kid crouch down on the ground and try to force the chains. When he couldn't, he vibrated his hand and tried to cut them, but there was still no effect. I can't break this thing, Kid shouted to them after getting up. Kyrix, let Kid and the others deal with the fight. Break the darn chains and get her out of here. While fighting Brother Blood, Robin yelled and tried to steal the amulet back. As a person who doesn't know much about mystical forces, Dio has to give him credit for figuring out why he asked him to free the hostage. Robin, the church members are heading towards Kyrix. Dio heard Starfire's voice shouting, and he saw her flying and firing her blasts below. Kid Flash, Robin shouted, a bit more tired. So Dio ignored the battle and focused all his attention on the chain around her body. Stop moving, or I won't be able to free you, Dio told her. The woman struggles a few more times and finally stands still, which allows him to examine the chain. This one is definitely a magical artifact, or rather, an enchanted item. The one that was holding her up on the ceiling was not. The entire steel of the chain is inscribed with small runes. Dio managed to understand 10 of them, the most basic ones. Dio doesn't deal with enchantments very often because they're hard to use. He will definitely be focusing on them more in the future because giving things or beings magical abilities is very useful. Dio couldn't break the chain with his sword or brute force. A piece like this surely has some security measure against that. The prisoner might get hurt because of it, and he didn't know how to bypass what's written on the chain, so let's trick the enchantments. The enchantment is working by using the captured person's energy. It might have security measures against brute force, but defenses against other spells are much more advanced, as spells are highly varied. Of course, an experienced sorcerer can protect the chain against the most commonly used spells to destroy enchantments, but Dio's spells are known to no one except him and Zatanna, who helped him create some of them. For the rest of the day, Dio won't be able to use magic, even if this works. Nevertheless, Dio touched the chain and spoke aloud. Επικαλούμε τη βασιλιά του βασιλιά Λίθητα. I summon the forgetfulness of King Lethe. A milky aura envelopes the chain, and then it is forgotten. Dio pulled it from her body as if the metal had become intangible, which is what happened since he erased its existence using the part of forgetting. It wasn't easy. Denying reality in this way was only possible because the object was small, and he could only maintain it for a second, but it was enough to free her. I did it! Dio exclaimed happily about his achievement, only to be thrown to the ground below by an invisible force. Dio stood up and looked at the spot where he had been thrown. A few meters above him, the woman stood up, and her white outfit started to change. It turns into a purple cape with a hood. The clothing on her body turns black, more like a bathing suit, covering her body and arms while leaving her long legs exposed. Then, the woman begins to levitate, and the light around her is consumed by the darkness emanating from her body. It's not the same darkness he could control. Hers has a certain glow, unlike Dio's, which is like a pitch-black void. This darkness expanded and took the form of a huge raven with its head held high, spreading its wings in all their glory. You are going to sacrifice me, Raven shouted, and her hood was lowered, which revealed her face. She is about the same age as them. She has pale skin, short black hair, blue eyes, and a red mark in the middle of her forehead. It's Trigon's daughter, Raven, and she is very angry. Chapter 58. Chapter 57. Raven. She is a half-demon, the daughter of one of DC's most powerful demons, Trigon, an extra-dimensional demon with his own dimension under his command. A dimension entirely filled with demons under his rule. Dio had always anticipated encountering her as one of the Titans. But the real surprise was that the Church of Blood was a cult dedicated to Trigon on Earth. Trigon also has some connection to the Lazarus Pits. It's the only thing that makes sense. It would take someone on this side who has Trigon's blood running through them to bring such a powerful being here. However, Raven wasn't much of a supporter of her father. These details explain the ritual of forced sacrifice. If the girl wasn't going to help them bring her father here, a spell using her blood would have to do. So there she was, a half-demon who trained in mystical arts and was very angry at the people who were about to sacrifice and possibly end the world. Dio believed she had every right to be. Raven raised an arm and pointed to the other side of the room. She was floating in the air with a huge black raven behind her. A large 3-fingered and 3-meter-wide black claw extended from the shadow of the raven behind her and quickly tried to grab Brother Blood, who had been fighting Robin until a moment ago. Robin took something from his belt and pointed it away when he saw it coming at him in that direction. The grappling gun fired a hook, and the cable pulled Robin away. Unfortunately, Brother Blood did not have any of that equipment, so he raised the amulet of Orion as if it would protect him. The amulet shone brightly, and a red screen appeared in front of him, but the raven's claw easily pierced the screen and grabbed Brother Blood. Fate had said that an amateur sorcerer could use some of the amulet's functions, but even an apprentice sorceress was no match for her. Let me go! Brother Blood shouted. But the claw was powerful, and it retracted, turning Brother Blood to face Raven, whose eyes were glowing with her dark energy. In the middle of this, the amulet was dropped by Brother Blood near Jinx in the center of the room. She ran toward it without a second thought and ignored her enemies, since anyone with even some understanding of magic could see its value. However, even though she could alter fate, she couldn't do that to something moving faster than her senses could perceive. Kid Flash easily grabbed the amulet and ran it over to Robin, placing it in his hand. Mission accomplished, boss, Kid Flash said and smiled. Good job, kid, Robin replied and placed the amulet on his belt. How it fits in is a mystery Dio really wants to solve. While Jinx roared with anger at this turn of events, Raven took care of Brother Blood. She crushed him against the ground with her claw ruthlessly and hit him without hesitation. Thud! The ground shook. The dark claw disappeared, and a 3-meter-wide crater shaped like a 3-fingered claw was created with the impact. Brother Blood stood up in the middle of it. He likely had some equipment or mystical artifact, as the previous attack should have killed an ordinary human. He's still alive, Raven exclaimed while looking at him. Let's try once more then. Raven shouted again, and another black, 3-fingered claw materialized behind her, attacking him again. No! Starfire shouted and stepped in front of the claw, which stopped in midair before reaching her. Get out of my way! Raven yelled at Starfire. If you kill him like this, what will be the difference between you two? Starfire asked her. Dio could see Raven's face trembling as she thought about what Starfire said. Azarath Metrian Zinthos. Raven spoke softly, so softly that Dio only heard it thanks to my super hearing. The mantra seemed to help her calm down as the raven behind her began to disappear, and she descended slowly to the ground. They've hurt brother. Kill the unbelievers. Death to the demons. It is never good to hurt a cult leader in front of their followers. Robin, we need to go now, Dio urgently told him. What about Mammoth and the bald woman? Robin asked back. They're gone already, Dio replied. The two retreated the moment Raven hit Brother Blood, and Dio doubted they'd be able to find them again in the tunnels with Jinx's luck spell active. They will probably end up walking in circles until they leave the tunnels.
Let's retreat through the tunnel, Robin shouted after assessing the situation. I can help, Raven said quietly. All help is welcome. Aqualad accepted after knocking out a cultist. Raven's raven reappeared again. She flew over everyone, close to Starfire, and then vanished into the wings of the bird. Next were Aqualad, Speedy, and Kid Flash, who were staring at it frozen like idiots. Dio was next and felt a sensation similar to when he used his shadow abilities, so he didn't resist it. Within the raven's energy, Dio felt weightless and bound to it. However, Dio sensed that he could easily break free if he wanted to. After it grabbed Robin, the raven flew to the top and passed through solid rock as if it were intangible. When they reached the surface, the raven spread its wings, and all of them were spat out. Not a great place to appear, Dio said while looking around. They appeared right in the center of the destroyed city, a location now swarmed with government troops and the church's private security. I can only teleport you short distances at the moment, Raven told him. I didn't mean to sound ungrateful. I just blame our bad luck, Dio said to make a better impression. They're here, a guard shouted and pointed at them a few meters away. I'll activate the escape plan. Robin said that and took something from his belt. When everything happens, follow us, and everything will be fine, Starfire said and smiled at Raven. Happen what? Raven asks with confusion. After a short time, Robin presses a button on a small device on his belt, which causes small explosions all over the destroyed village. These explosions sent a huge cloud of white smoke across the city, which blinded everyone. It's Robin's contingency plan in case they have no choice but to escape on the surface. The original plan was to use the tunnels, but Robin always has a plan within a plan. Dio felt sorry for the innocent people who lived in a war zone. It must already be a stressful hell, and now they've done this in the middle of the night. Dio hopes no one gets hurt while running around blind. We have to move quickly. Robin said that and gave them goggles that seemed to have night vision. No thanks, I can see without these. Dio declined. Me too. Raven also declined. I don't need to see to guide me, Starfire said. The smoke might block Dio's vision, but his senses work better than his sight. Dio believes that Starfire is capable of doing this because of her training, and Ravina is a half-demon who has received Sorcerer Society training, so she must have her own unique ways. Then let's go. Robin said that and ran to the north. They ran their way through the debris to avoid the patrols of armed soldiers wandering like lost ants in the fog. After 10 minutes, they finally leave the village and the white mist. Robin hid their flying car over 5 kilometers to the south, behind a small dirt hill, and under a military-style tarp. The ride home is quite lively. Kid Flash is ecstatic about the mission's success. Kid Flash is so happy that not even Speedy's remark about them letting Mammoth and Jinx go will irritate him as they exit the sky of Casnia. Robin sent the Justice League a message informing them of the mission. Batman said he was waiting for them at the Titan Tower to provide a more detailed report. So they finally arrived home after days of sleeping, eating, and showering in a war zone. Dio almost shed tears of happiness when his phone connected to the tower's Wi-Fi. However, he couldn't take a relaxing bath while Batman and Green Lantern were waiting for them, especially since Robin had asked him to be there to tell him what had happened. The chosen location for their discussion was the tower's meeting room, a place that had never been used until now. The room was nothing special, with a small space with a round table and 6 chairs, offering a beautiful view through the window. Robin and Dio sat in chairs next to each other, while Batman and Green Lantern stood near the table in front of them. Start. Batman said that and didn't even bother with pleasantries. Chapter 59. Chapter 58. Robin then told them everything that happened on the mission, which made Dio think of movies where a soldier reports to a general. Robin only stopped to let Dio tell him about the things he didn't know when they got to the ritual. I understand, Batman said when the report was finished. Do you have any idea what the Church of Blood was trying to summon? Green Lantern asked, and everyone looked at Dio. It appears he becomes the Justice League's paranormal consultant when the League sorcerers aren't present. They were trying to summon an extra-dimensional demon into this reality, Dio simply said, as if it's something very normal. This isn't the Justice League's first encounter with a demon. How bad would that be? Batman asked. Very, very bad. Trigon is a demon who managed to conquer his entire dimension and turn it into his personal hell. In addition to his incredible abilities, he has an army of demons. Green Lantern asked after everyone had had a moment to process what Dio had said. If this Trigon is so powerful, why does he need a ritual to come here? He can come to this plane, but not with full power and for a short time. I don't know the details, but there are ancient laws that must be followed, and one of them is that Trigon can only come to another reality with his full power if he's invited. Dio kept the information about receiving an invitation from one's own blood private.
Raven is allowed to have her own secrets, and revealing to everyone that she's the daughter of this demon isn't a good way to make a good first impression. Do we need to worry about the church being able to perform another ritual like this? Batman asked with seriousness. The amulet they stole is very rare. They would need another similar one or a specialist sorcerer to try again. I don't think any sorcerer would willingly summon Trigon, even if they were forced to, because if he comes here, everything will die. So it will take some time for them to perform such a ritual again. And the well is part of this ritual? Batman asked again. You mean the green water? Yes, somehow the two are connected. Batman already knew about the well because of his other enemy, but he didn't share this information. It would create suspicion about Dio if he knew about the well, so it's better to pretend he knows nothing. And what do we know about the girl being used as a sacrifice? Green Lantern asked. Robin raised his wrist, typed something on his computer, and connected it to the TV on the wall. Then images of Raven start to appear on the screen, all quite old, when she was about 4 or 5 years old. She was registered as Rachel Roth, daughter of Arella Roth, whose father was not registered. I also found out that her mother was part of the Church of Blood, but she severed ties with them before her daughter was born. They lived a normal life for 2 years in a small town after that until they were reported missing years ago. Robin said that and finished his report. The boys certainly spent the whole trip researching their new friend. Do you think they were kidnapped by the church and kept under their control until now? Green Lantern asked, and his face turned a bit stern. Dio, what do you think about her abilities? Robin asked Dio and avoided the question from Green Lantern. Why are you asking me? Dio asked curiously. I don't know much about magic, but it seemed like that's what she was using earlier. Robin replied. You're right, it was magic, but where she learned it or from whom, I can't help you. Dio replied. How powerful are her magical abilities? Batman asked Dio. Her technique isn't focused on physical damage like mine, but she's definitely more skilled at using her powers than I am. Dio admitted his magical inferiority. There's no shame in that because the girl grew up in a magical society and studied with them for years, but I'm 80% sure I can win if we have to fight. We need to contact the system. They'll help her. No way. Dio immediately rejects the Green Lantern's meaningless suggestion. I agree, Batman said. Why? Green Lantern asked and didn't understand the problem. We know very little about the girl, but we know that the Church of Blood is very interested in her, and if we put her in the system, it won't take long for them to find her with the political power that some of their members have. Batman explained. The safest place for her right now is with us. Robin said. I agree, but we need to talk to her. / Batman accepted. Robin stood up from his chair, removed the amulet from his belt, gave it to Batman, and then went toward the door. Dio really wants to research the amulet, but he knows it's way beyond his league. It's better to leave it in more capable hands, and he can only hope that he will have another chance to do so in the future. And I'm going to take a bath, Dio said as he stood up. Before you do that, I suggest calling your sister. She's been calling Diana every half hour, asking about you. Batman informed him. Crap. I forgot to inform Vanessa about the mission. I haven't called her in days, and she's going to chew me out. Dio ran as fast as he could and got off the elevator to the floor where the rooms were. This talk should happen in his room if he wants to have it. Dio ignored Wally, Calderay, Chem and Roy, who were eating in front of the large TV screen in the living room, and climbed the stairs to his room. However, Dio stopped running when he saw Coriandar and Ravina standing, looking at the door to his room. Can I help you with something? Dio asked while looking at them. Coriandar turned and looked at him with a smile and said, Dio, it looks like our new companion liked your spells on your room's door. I didn't know you were a magician, Ravina said softly, still looking at his door. She had her face covered every time Dio used magic. I'm more of an apprentice. Nice to meet you. My name is Diomedes Inwood. Dio introduced himself and raised his hand toward her. My name is Raven. Raven said this without shaking his hand. Dio, do you know which room Raven will stay in? I'd like her to be close to mine, Coriandar asked. We still don't know if they will allow me to stay. Raven said to Coriandar. It's already confirmed. You're more than welcome, Dio announced. That's amazing. I really love the team, but the female company was missing. Coriandar said it with a smile and jumped in joy. And you can choose any vacant room you want. Dio continued. Thank you, Raven said and looked at him without showing any joy. It's a bit strange to see her so cold and indifferent, especially since not long ago, she almost killed a man in her anger. It was nothing, Raven. But before you settle into your room, Robin and the League want to talk to you. He must be looking for you now, Dio said. There you are. Robin's voice called them from behind Dio. Raven, Batman wanted to have a talk with you. Robin added. Ravina nodded to Dio and began walking toward Robin. I would love to talk about magic later when you have time, Raven. Dio turned and looked at her back, covered by her purple cloak, and said. Raven stopped walking, and after a second, she just nodded with her back to me and continued. I'm going too, Coriandar said, still excited, and ran toward her new friend. Dio watched them until they were out of sight and then entered his room, which had remained untouched since his leaving. Dio grabbed his cheap phone and called Vanessa. Dio is aware that he needs to buy a good phone in light of current technology, but Luther and Wayne produce the best ones. Dio assumed that these two had hidden ways in their technology that allowed them to record and keep an eye on everyone. Where were you? Vanessa screamed, which startled Dio when the call connected. I'm really sorry, Van. I was on an urgent mission without any ways to contact you. Dio explained as quickly as he could. Such an urgent mission that you couldn't even send a message before? Vanessa asked with irony dripping from her words. That was definitely my mistake, and I promise it won't happen again. The call falls silent for a moment, and Dio braces himself for the next outburst. I thought you had forgotten me. Vanessa said it with a voice filled with sadness. I would never leave you, Van. You know that, and I promise this won't happen again. Okay. Vanessa replied with sniffling on the other end of the line. How about this? The weekend is coming up. Why don't you visit the city? Dio suggested, improving her mood. Can I see your new home? Vanessa asked more excitedly. I'll have to ask the owners of it, but if you can't come, we'll just tour the city together. There's no shortage of interesting landmarks. The Titan Tower may be their home, but it's also the headquarters of a group of heroes. Dio can't just show up here with his sister without saying anything. Okay, I'm coming tomorrow. Vanessa responded. That's great. Send me a message about the bus schedule when you buy the ticket, and I'll be there to pick you up. I've already bought it. I was going tomorrow even if you hadn't gotten in touch. Even better. You can stop trying to improve my mood. Instead, why don't you tell me about your adventure? So, Dio tried his best to explain the mission without truly revealing it, as he didn't think discussing it over the phone was sensitive. So you went from being a hero to a League spy? Vanessa asked after the whole story. No, we acted that way because it was the best option at the time. We didn't want to provide ammunition that could be used against us in the future. Dio explained. Anyway, it must have been a lot of fun. Take my word for it. It wasn't. Dio said this while remembering the situation in Casnia. After that, they returned to talking about what was happening in her life. Everything was going fine until she told him she had started dating someone from her school. Dio stayed calm and asked for his name, but she refused and said that he would ask Steve or one of his ARGUS friends to investigate him. Chapter 60. Chapter 59. Knock, knock, knock. Dio meeting downstairs. Calder said after knocking on the door. I'll be right there. Dio replied and heard him walking away. I have to go now, Van. You can call me later if you need anything. Dio said on the phone. Okay, see you later. Dio hangs up the phone, gets up, leaves his room, and goes down to the lower part of the floor where all the Titans members are with Batman and Green Lantern. Dio went down the stairs and stood beside Robin. In front of them are Batman, Green Lantern, and Raven. The mission wasn't a complete success since Mammoth escaped again, but the main objective was achieved. Batman began to speak. And regarding Miss Raven's situation, we decided it would be better for her protection if she teams up with you for now. Batman continued. If you accept, of course. We won't force you to live with anyone you don't want to. The Green Lantern added. Robin looked at everyone's faces to check for any objections, but they all seemed fine with it, and Coriandar was jumping for joy. We agree. Welcome to the team, Raven. Robin said. Raven just nodded without showing emotion. It's settled then. Green Lantern and I will return to the League's base. We need to update the others about this incident. Batman said and went to the elevator with Green Lantern by his side. It was a pleasure seeing all of you again, kids. Green Lantern said this and waved when the elevator doors closed. After the adults left, they just sat there and looked at each other. Then, Wally made a great suggestion. How about a welcome party? Wally turned around and came back with a bunch of stacked pizza boxes without waiting for a response. They were all starving, so there was no refusal. They sat on the floor in front of the couch in a circle while Wally made another trip, this time coming back with several cans of soda, and then we attacked the food. You should think of your superhero name. It took me a while to come up with mine. Coriandar said this while holding 2 slices of pizza with different toppings in each hand. Superhero name? Raven asked with confusion and was surprised at the lack of table manners at Coriandar's place. A name to use when we're on a mission, to hide your identity, you know. Wally explained, eating more and faster than coriander. I never thought about that, she replied. You should know because as heroes, we wouldn't have any peace in our lives if everyone found out our real names. Robin said this while eating his slice with a fork and knife, like a prince who learned etiquette from an English butler. I don't need that, as I have no civilian life. Raven said. I also don't have a civilian life on the land, but it's very useful to have at least one real name to enjoy a normal life, even if it's not normal. Calder said, while also eating one slice at a time like a normal human. I don't know if I want a normal life. Raven refused again. For now, maybe not, but who knows in the future. So it's better to be prepared. Roy spoke up for the first time since they returned from the mission. I don't know what name to choose then. Raven gave up. How about just Raven? Dio suggested. That's not a good suggestion. You didn't even remove just one letter. Coriander rejected his suggestion before Ravina could even respond. It wasn't my intention. I was suggesting Raven, literally because when she used her magic before, a black raven appeared. Dio explained. Ravina has another name, Rachel Roth, but she introduced herself as Raven, which means that's the name she chose, whether intentionally or not. Raven, I like it. Raven said this and made a slightly strange face as she looked at Dio. At first, Dio didn't understand, but then he saw her lips tremble a bit. She was trying to contain the joy of having her name, which was quite cute. It's settled then. Welcome to the team officially, Raven. Calder said, then followed by everyone else celebrating the birth of a new heroine, who is currently the strongest in the group. Who wants ice cream? Wally asked and stood up in a good mood. So, the welcome party continued. Raven didn't interact much, as she is very controlled in her actions. The most she did was respond to the questions asked without revealing much personal information. She wasn't doing much, but it didn't seem to bother her, and it didn't change the mood of the party. The same thing happened until 1 a.m. when Coriander called Raven into her room because the girl didn't have any personal items with her and was interested in the things that only Coriander had. In the end, only Dick, Roy and Dio were left sitting on the floor. Unlike before, the atmosphere was a bit tense. Are you going to tell me what's going on? Dick asked. It's about the rookie. We agreed to handle things on our own, so don't interfere, Dick. Roy said this while looking at Dio. I agree. We have to deal with this ourselves, Dio said and looked at Dick. Dick wasn't happy with that and stared at the two of them for a few seconds before getting up. Fine, but don't cross the line. I'll be watching. Dick said that and walked away. Shall we? Dio asked. Let's. Roy replied. They both stood up and walked to the elevator. When the door opened, they both entered, and Roy pressed the button for the ground floor. It didn't take long for the door to open again, and they both headed to the back of the ground floor, which led to the agreed location. The entire way was made in silence, and neither of them even looked at each other. After walking a few meters, they reached the back of the tower, an area with only grass and open space. With Roy a few meters away from Dio, it was Dio who broke the silence. I don't want to waste too much time on this, so let me ask, what's your problem with me? Chapter 61. Chapter 60. I don't want to waste too much time on this, so let me ask, what's your problem with me? Roy didn't immediately respond to his question. How about helping me? Roy just stared at Dio as if he were trying to find the right words, or he genuinely didn't know why he didn't like Dio. So, Dio asked and tried to initiate a response. It was already quite late, and there wasn't much light in the area where they were. However, that wasn't a problem for either of them. Dio can see better in the dark, and Roy is trained to fight in such situations. However, the more time they stayed here, the more likely it was that Dick would interrupt their conversation. He would do so quickly, as he was watching them from the first-floor window. Dio couldn't detect him in his hero suit, but since he was wearing normal clothes, he could hear the sound of his breath. He focused a bit more to hear his heart beating at a controlled rhythm without any changes. Dio doesn't know what kind of training Batman gave him, but Robin was so skilled that he could lower his heart rate while following or watching a target. Finally, Dio saw Roy's lips, and he answered his question. There are so many issues with you that I've spent all this time summarizing them. Save me from this nonsense. Just speak up. Or do you not even know why you act like an idiot? Dio said, as he was getting a bit angry. If there really wasn't a real issue, the idiot was behaving like a child with me, which is worse than having a reason to hate me. That's also one of your problems, the way you act, with no respect for the members of this group. The only one here with no respect is you. Since the day I joined you, you have all acted in a rude, ignorant and foolish way. With each word, Dio approached Roy a bit, and he didn't move while staring at him. What are you going to do? Start a fight? Roy asked. Roy also came up to him and stood with his face right next to him, which was very brave. Come on, I guarantee that even with all these powers, you'll end up kissing the ground. Roy threatened. Well, it seems like I finally understand the reasons for his idiocy. So, this is it? All this idiotic attitude is because you're insecure about me and my abilities. Dio asked with a mocking smile. What the hell are you talking about? Roy shouted and did not move away. Bingo! This is so stupid. Dio said this and stepped away from him. What did you call me? Roy shouted again and placed his hand on Dio's shoulder. Dio grabbed his hand and threw him over his shoulder, but Roy twisted in the air and gave Dio a kick that he dodged by taking a small leap backward. Roy landed on his feet, and Dio remained in the position where he had been. Don't even think about walking away. Let's settle this now, Roy said while looking at him angrily. There's nothing to settle. I came here for a reason, but I must say, I'm so disappointed that this whole conversation has become pointless. Dio said. What the hell are you talking about, rookie? Roy asked, still not understanding. It's quite clear now that the reason you've been acting like an idiot towards me is that you're jealous. Dio replied. Jealous? Roy yelled, more confused than angry. Jealous of my powers, jealous of the one who trained me, or even jealous because I easily joined the Titans. Dio continued. For the first time since Dio had known him, Roy was left speechless while looking at him in bewilderment. I can understand that, you know. You're a human without superhuman abilities, fighting alongside superpowered beings using only your intelligence, equipment, and training. Dio began to explain. Seeing that he was still silent, Dio continued. So a younger kid with superpowers, trained by one of the world's greatest fighters and heroines, shows up and does everything you do, but in a way you can never match. The more Dio spoke, the more damage Roy took, which caused him to take a few steps back, but he had to listen to it all. Living this life, coexisting, and fighting against gods and monsters must be an unimaginable pressure that I'll never understand like you, but listen to me now, Roy. Dio approached him, grabbing his shirt and pulling him close to his eyes. Stop acting like a child and start acting like a man. Dio released his shirt, and Roy fell back on his buttocks. Do you think you're the only one who feels this way? By all the gods, Roy, our leader is as human as you are. The Justice League has someone like you as its strategic leader, and I don't see either of them acting like you. Not because they don't understand their disadvantages compared to others, but because they acknowledge them and fight to compensate for them. Dio walked past Roy and headed for the entrance. He didn't look back. Roy had to sort out his own shit. Dio can't change how he sees himself or how he sees the world. All he can do is give his opinion and pray that it's enough to lift him out of this sea of insecurity. Dio crossed the lobby and went for the elevator. It was late, and Dio had enough excitement for one day. He might be able to get an hour of sleep and then get back to researching how to create a spell or his plans to go into the Underworld. That was a bit harsh. Dick said this behind Dio. Someone needed to speak up, and he needed to hear it. Dio replied without turning around, and he looked at the elevator door as it opened. Even so, it was a bit tough to hear, coming from one of those who fight among and against gods and monsters. Robin continued. Dio stepped into the elevator, turned around, and looked at Robin. As the doors closed, I said, "That's why you have my full respect and admiration." Dio pressed the button for the floor with the rooms and sighed out loud. This day really needs to end. The elevator door opened, and just as he was about to head up, Dio noticed Raven on the balcony of the floor, looking at the moon. Dio knew she probably wanted to be alone, but he went to her anyway, opened the glass door, and stood beside her, looking at the new moon. How did you manage to escape Coriandar? Dio asked with genuine curiosity. I asked for some time to meditate. Raven replied, still not looking at him. Don't get me wrong, I really like her, but she's very, very enthusiastic. Dio finished. Yes. You're his first sister-in-arms on this planet, as she would say, so she's ecstatic, but that will calm down over time. They fell into silence. Why didn't you tell them? Raven asked in a more serious tone. Tell them what? Dio asked with confusion. About who my father is. Raven continued and still looked up at the sky. How, in the name of all gods, did she find this out? Is she a telepath in this reality? Then she looked at Dio and answered. Don't be so startled. I can't read your mind or anything like that. How did you know that I knew then? Dio asked. Batman and Green Lantern have information about him, so I figured that, and from the emotions I sensed from you in our first encounter. Emotions. I'm an empath. I can feel others' emotions. Raven explained. I see. Now how to respond. Lying would make me feel guilty and make her doubt me, so it's better to tell the truth, but not the whole truth, at least not for now. I knew because of the ritual. For Trigon to enter a different dimension from yours with full power, he needs to be willingly invited by someone of your blood. And you never doubted me, even though you know I'm the daughter of a demon? Raven asked and looked back at the moon. Your situation made that trust stronger, and you would have reciprocated it by now if you planned to. You are a living key that can be used at any time. Are you going to tell them? I think it's up to you to do that when you're ready. So they stayed silent and looked at the moon for several minutes until Raven spoke again. Thank you. Dio didn't reply and changed the subject to avoid making it more awkward. Since you're not sleeping, how about helping me? With what? Raven asked with some curiosity. I'm working on a spell, but I'm running out of ideas. A new perspective can really help me. What do you think? I'd be happy to. Let's call Coriandar too. She doesn't understand anything about magic, but she'll agree just to be close to you. They went back inside. Dio went up to his room to get his notes, then came down, and the three of them gathered at the table in the small kitchen on the floor below, and they started the conversation until dawn. Chapter 62, Chapter 61. A month passed, and Dio wished he could say it was a very exciting month with supervillains trying to take over the world or demons trying to enter this reality. It did happen, but not in their territory, so this month was very peaceful. They only had to deal with 2 quickly resolved robberies, some fires, and accidents. Vanessa visited him as promised. They spent the whole weekend exploring the city. When Dio asked everyone if she could visit the tower, they all agreed. Vanessa met the team, and the meeting went smoothly. Vanessa became friends with Coriandar, and they exchanged messages and talked regularly. Dio was happy about this. His sister needed a strong friend to support her. Dio also obtained information about her current boyfriend after asking a favor from Robin. He received a folder with all the information about the person and his family. Unfortunately, he didn't find any reason to act against him. Robin also thought the boy was a good kid, but Dio was still watching him. One wrong move, and he'll rip his heart out and trap his soul in a public restroom. Dio really doesn't know how to do that, but he will learn just for him. This month, Dio also made some progress on his plans. The method for traveling to the Underworld was easier than he thought it would be, but he remembered that entering the Underworld is easy. The problem is getting out. However, Dio found a solution and prepared for his first trip, which would happen in 10 days. Now about the flying spell, Dio was still a bit stuck and hadn't made any progress. Dio was hoping that his conversations with Raven would inspire him. Dio's little problem with Roy has also been resolved. After their conversation, he stopped bothering him and even talking to him. It will take some time for things to return to normal between them, but at least they have made progress. The new team member is doing very well. Raven is very good at what she does, as she was trained as a sorcerer in another reality, but she hasn't proven herself as a hero yet. Sadly, there hasn't been much progress in her interactions with the group. Raven spends most of her time in her room or on the roof, where she meditates. The only person who manages to get her out of her shell is Coriandar, who drags her out to explore the city or just to spend time together. Dio interacts with her a lot, but they only talk about one subject: magic, which they both enjoy. Since Ravina's magic was taught in another dimension, it's a bit different from what they have on Earth, so exchanging information between them is very productive. However, she had never clearly explained how her magic worked until today. In short, are the spells you use in combat advanced versions of astral projection? Dio asked. They were on the gym floor, facing each other, and talked about magic when she explained how her spells work. Yes, that's the main branch of magic in Azarath. Raven replied. At the moment, Raven was wearing a long black dress, and Dio was in jeans and a white shirt. I always thought astral projection could only be used for spying or traveling to other planes. Those are the common uses of astral projection. What I do is summon the true form of my soul, which allows me to interact with the physical world and use other spells. Raven explained. So, can anyone learn to use your Raven? I never really understood how her powers worked in the comics, so I'm learning it now. It's not that simple. To use this spell, you need to understand and know the shape of your soul, and that's not an easy task. A lot of people try for decades to achieve it. She raised her hand and pointed to a set of dumbbells on the other side of the room. Suddenly, a black aura wrapped around her hand and made it float in the air like one of the dumbbells. It's only after discovering the shape of your soul that you can start practicing the initial spells until you reach the level where I can summon this form into the physical world. Raven continued to explain. She lowered her hand, and the dumbbell returned to its place. Then she stood up, and her body was surrounded by bright black energy, and a black raven with open wings appeared behind her. Do you understand? Raven asked as she sat back down. Yes, you're at the highest level of your practice because you can summon the raven. Dio inquired. Not even close. True masters can not only call on the soul's true forms, but they can also use them to cast advanced spells like time or dimension travel. Raven explained. This made Dio a bit afraid of Trigon. I know he's powerful, but defeating a magical civilization as powerful as the people of Azarath was a daunting feat. I know I might be pushing my luck here, but could you teach me? Dio asked hopefully. Ravina fell silent for a moment before giving him an answer. The people who taught me this are lost, but they never turned away apprentices. Raven said, her face showing great pain. I was so stupid that I forgot that she blames herself for the destruction of Azarath, and here I am, forcing her to remember her destroyed home. So I'd be happy to teach you, even though I'm not a master. Raven continued. How do we begin? Dio asked to take her mind off of Azarath for a little while. First, you need to understand astral projection. Raven began. I've practiced with my teacher, but I don't use it much, and I'm not very talented with it. Then, let's start by gaining some practice. Raven said and closed her eyes. In less than a second, Raven's astral form appeared floating above her head. The form looked just like her physical body, and the only difference was that the astral form was almost transparent. What are you waiting for? Raven asked in her astral form. This showed her tremendous control over astral projection. It takes a lot of practice and control to be able to quickly separate the soul from the body. Dio followed her example and closed his eyes, recalling the teachings on how to separate his soul from his body. After a few minutes, Dio's soul floated out of his body, and he found himself facing Ravina's astral projection in the air, which was still cross-legged and floating while looking at him. 10 minutes, not bad. Raven said. Now what? Dio asked. You will spend as much time as possible in this form every day. You need to become proficient at entering and leaving your body easily. Understood. Let's take a little tour then. Raven said. Raven flew up and passed through the ceiling to the next floor. Dio followed her, floating slowly, and reached the next floor as well. There, Dio saw Dick and Roy building with some equipment, but they didn't notice them. Astral forms are invisible to those without mystical abilities or natural spiritual perception. Ravina kept ascending, passing through the next floor and the next, until she reached the roof. There, she stopped while hovering several meters above the roof and watched the sunset. During my practice, I spent most of my days in this form inside my body. Now, being like this feels more familiar to me than my physical body. Raven said. That doesn't sound like a good thing. Dio remarked. Yes, but it has its charm. In this form, we can't feel physical pain, we don't get hungry or tired, and it's not easy for us to cause destruction in the physical plane either. The last part of her statement had more meaning than she let on. Dio was about to ask for more information, but he saw a jet approaching the tower on the sky. Enemies? Ravina asked while looking at the approaching dot. No, they're allies. Dio replied. With his enhanced vision, Dio could easily see that it was an ARGUS jet approaching at high speed. A few seconds later, the jet landed on the tower's rooftop, and his friend Etta Candy jumped out immediately and ran toward the elevator. This woman's actions showed that something had happened. I have to go. Something must have happened to Diana. Dio didn't wait for a response from Raven and dove toward the building, returning to his body. Dio rushed inside and headed for the elevator. When he pressed the button for the floor, Dick's voice came through the elevator. Dio, come to the main room now. As the doors opened, he saw Etta Candy with the team. She was wearing military attire with a vest over it and looked quite tired, but there were no visible injuries on her body. You're growing up so fast, Diomedes. Etta greeted him with a gentle smile. Interesting. Is there a problem, Etta? Dio asked worriedly about Diana. She needs help, and the details will have to wait. Etta replied. Then let's go. Wait, we can help too. Robin shouted in his hero suit and blocked them from entering the elevator. I'm sorry, Robin, but this is a personal matter, and Diana made it clear that she only wanted Diomedes' help. Etta declined their assistance, and the two of them entered the elevator. If things get out of control, I'll call you. Dio said before the elevator doors closed. Chapter 63, Chapter 62. They walked without speaking to the ARGUS jet. It was a small two-seater aircraft equipped with stealth technology and perfect for quick and covert travel. Etta took the pilot seat, and Dio sat in the co-pilot seat. She started operating the controls and prepared for takeoff. Meanwhile, Dio looked out the window and saw Raven hurrying in his direction. Dio gestured for her to stop and then nodded in a simple signal. She understood and stepped back. Etta took off and headed west while slowly increasing the speed to the maximum. After a few minutes of flight, Dio asked, "What happened, Etta?" She was focused on the controls but began to speak without looking at him. It started as a simple mission until Steve went offline and missed the scheduled contact with headquarters. It's not uncommon for missions to get a bit frantic, but since Steve is the ARGUS leader, we alerted Diana, and she also went to check. She didn't respond either. Dio guessed. Yes, we got worried, so we went to the location with me in charge of an entire squad of soldiers. We managed to find Diana, but things quickly got out of control. After a lot of effort, she could only get me out of that hell. Thankfully, Diana was still alive and well, but I couldn't trust all she said. What was Steve's mission? Dio asked. He was investigating strange events in a small town. We had reason to believe that these strange events were connected to a new metahuman. The rest of the flight was peaceful and done in silence. Etta clearly didn't want to talk and focused all her attention on piloting. In the middle of the journey, Dio summoned his armor and sword to get ready for action. Finally, they landed in the middle of a wheat field at nightfall. They left their seats and walked to the jet's exit. Dio walked out into the field and looked at the wheat, which had grown to just above his waist. There was nothing else around, and the sky was beautiful, filled with stars on a cloudless night. Now that we've arrived. Dio said this to Etta, who had just exited. Why don't you tell me who you are? Dio's question made her freeze for a moment until she finally moved and gave him a forced smile. What are you talking about, Diomedes? I'm me, your friend, Etta said while approaching. You acted reasonably well. The only problem was your lack of attention to details. Seeing that Dio didn't fall for her attempt, Etta drew her silver pistol from her waist, but he was already prepared. Dio grabbed her wrist and kicked her legs, which made her fall to the ground. Dio took the pistol from her hand and placed his foot in the center of her chest to immobilize her on the ground. She tried to free herself while holding his leg with both hands and trying to push him away, but Dio didn't budge. As I was saying, you lacked attention to details. Etta never calls me by my full name, and she's very afraid of flying, even though she's a good pilot. She always trembles a bit when she's in the air. Dio had found her behavior at the teen tower strange, but he ignored it until Raven came running and gave him the answer to his intuition. In this situation, it's normal to ask for help, but Diana could really be in trouble, and there was a chance that Etta didn't tell anyone where Diana was when she was caught at the tower. Dio had to play the game until he got here. Now that I've told you how about you tell me who you are? Dio asked once more and got no response. Etta just stared into his eyes without saying a word. Αποκαλύψτε τον εαυτό σας. Reveal yourself. Dio said it out loud, but there were no visible changes in Etta. This indicated that either her disguise was very effective or that she was actually Etta but was under someone else's control. If it were the first option, it would be easy to get answers since he wouldn't have to worry about hurting her flesh. The second option was problematic. Now, Dio had to proceed without more information because someone under control would never reveal anything unless he had a way to break the control, which he didn't. Hypnos. Sleep. The second spell worked. Etta fell asleep instantly. Dio lifted her from the ground, put her in the seat, and put the seatbelt around her. He then used the belt from the seat next to her to tie her hands and legs together. Dio reached into her pockets just to be sure, and there was a silver card with the ARGUS logo on it. This card was used to start the aircraft. Dio left her like that and returned to the exit. He closed the back door and then picked up Etta's gun from the ground and exerted some force, crushing the metal. Dio threw away the gun, which had now turned into a paperweight. Finally, he took another look at the place he was in while contemplating his situation. Dio couldn't rely on the Titans. Raven undoubtedly alerted them. However, the aircraft that brought them here isn't easily traced, so it will take them some time to arrive, and Diana may not have that much time. Dio could send a message using the aircraft's radio to alert them, but he doesn't know the tower's frequency. When Dio gets back home, he'll adjust something else. Dio started to walk through the wheat field by himself while holding his sword and shield. It became obvious that the one who controlled Etta wanted his presence here. At first, Dio thought that this wheat field would be overrun with enemies waiting to capture him. However, Dio walked slowly and wasn't attacked at all. This could mean that his enemy was either too sure that he was a threat or they were confident that they could control him with their powers as soon as he landed. He had to make a plan or stop moving so slowly. After putting his shield away, he held up the palm of his hand and said, Έλα, και γίνε τα μάτια μου. Come and become my eyes. A skull appeared on his hand, with glowing eyes emitting red energy. The skull floated in the air and gave him an aerial view of the entire area where he was. Dio didn't need to search for long to find a city on the horizon. It looked like a small town with only a few lights on. Now that he had a destination, Dio continued to walk slowly through the field. Dio didn't deactivate his spell and kept the shared vision from the skull above, which followed his progress. Dio had to thank the one who brought him here. This place was genuinely calm. The cool breeze, the entire field illuminated only by the moon and stars. I think I'm becoming a nature lover. After walking for about half an hour, Dio stopped at the entrance of the small town, which was completely filled with people of all genders and ages holding weapons. The metahuman might be controlling everyone. This was going to be very difficult. Chapter 64. Chapter 63. It didn't take long to cross the wheat field, but Dio didn't immediately leave it when he reached its end. Dio chose to stay crouched and look at the city in front of him. It seems that the plan of the one controlling Etta was to bring him through the field to the city. Now there were more than 20 people armed with rifles and shotguns, including men and women. They even parked 2 cars on their sides, which blocked the entrance to the city. All the controlled civilian men waiting for him were wearing flannel shirts, jeans, and cowboy hats. It was clear he was in Texas because of this. And the large number of weapons around. Since they were clearly waiting for him, it was smart not to enter through the entrance. That makes me wonder why the mastermind didn't just show up at the landing area and take over my mind. That would have been much easier and less risky. They probably can't do it because they don't have the right tools to control Dio right now. They had control of Etta all the way to the tower and back, so distance doesn't seem to matter. During that journey, she didn't show any sign that his control was being broken. However, the mastermind also didn't dare or manage to control his friends in the tower. It would be much easier for them to capture him, and they would have more superpowers under their command. So, they can control someone from a distance who is already under their influence. That's probably what happened. Now, Dio just needs to see if there's a specific requirement to fall under his mind's control. Unfortunately, he has to go into the city to prove this. Dio ignored the welcoming committee. Instead, he went around a circle while hiding in the wheat field. The darkness here is deep, so even if they shine a light on him, they won't be able to see him. Dio walked about a kilometer to the right until he had a better view of one of the city's houses. Dio was correct in his assumption that this was an organized small town. The houses are well built with beautiful dark roofs, and the roads are paved and well lit, but no cars are driving on them. A lot of people are on the sidewalk. Dio moves through the shadows and appears on top of one of the houses. Once again, the darkness enveloped him and hid him. This way, he can watch the people walking on the street without fear. Dio immediately confirms that they are also being controlled. They all walk very orderly, like machines working in perfect rhythm. They are not regular people. They are scouts for the enemy. Dio ignored them for a moment and focused on the order and size of the city as a whole. He believed it had about 3,000 people who lived in this town based on its size, and he assumed that all of them were being controlled. This is going to be complicated. It's one thing to fight a group of cults. He can handle them. Dio doesn't feel bad about hurting them because they are ignorant. On the other hand, the idea of fighting against 3,000 innocent people under control is a lot less appealing. Well, there's no point in thinking about that right now. Dio needs to find Diana and Steve. Dio started jumping from one rooftop to another as he made his way toward the city center. Dio moved a little more slowly so he could take in what was happening below and make a mental map of the city in case he needed to leave quickly. Bomb! Then Dio heard a small explosion from the other side of the city in the east. He ran in that direction, as he thought it was likely Diana. Dio had been jumping off of rooftops to get there, but it broke when he got halfway there. He then fell to the ground and made his way through dark alleys, using the movement of shadows when he couldn't avoid enemy patrols. The funny thing is that the rhythmic sound of their footsteps makes it easy to locate them. Dio turned a corner and entered an alley that faced a small pet shop. The front window of the shop has a broken window with glass scattered all over the sidewalk. This doesn't seem to bother the 10 men and women carrying weapons while stepping on the glass and searching for someone. Dio ignored them and instead closed his eyes, trying to use his hearing to the fullest. He heard footsteps, but not from above. They were coming from the sewers beneath the street. Dio went to the nearest sewer entrance, removed the metal cover, and descended the stairs. He quickly regretted his decision as the smell hit him. I'm starting to hate sewers. They're all long, dirty tunnels with filthy water and rats running freely as if this were their kingdom. Since darkness doesn't bother him, Dio continued forward until he reached a turn. Dio didn't make the turn but stayed close to the wall without touching it. He didn't want to get his armor too dirty, even though it cleaned itself when he wanted to use it. Diana, it's me. Don't attack me. Dio said it in a low voice. Dio heard her racing heartbeat from the other side of the turn, and since he didn't want to take a hit to the head, he introduced himself first. Dio, is that really you? Diana asked with a weak voice from the other side. I'm coming to you. Please don't stab me with your sword before you see me. Dio joked as he approached her. As he made the turn, he saw a silver shield coming toward his chest. It caught him by surprise, but Dio managed to duck and grab her arm. Then he tossed her over his shoulder, and she fell onto her back in the clean sewer water. Are you out of your mind? Dio asked angrily as he put some distance between them. Sorry, I had to make sure you weren't being controlled. Diana said while smiling at him on the ground. She's still on the ground, and now he can get a good look at her body. It's no wonder it was so easy to take her down. Diana is a mess. Dio saw several cuts on her body and 2 bullet holes, one in her left shoulder and another in her abdomen. What happened to you? Dio asked as he helped her up from the ground and leaned her against the dirty wall so she could catch her breath. The controlled ones caught me by surprise. Diana explained. Let's get out of here and find a clean place to remove those bullets. Dio said while lifting her and putting her arm around his neck. The cuts are not a problem. They heal quickly without needing any care. However, the bullets in her body are a different issue. They need to remove them so she can heal. They walked slowly back to the entrance where he came in. Dio placed Diana against the stairs and went up first. After checking that everything was clear, he helped her climb up. It's hard to find or see her because she's close to Dio, and his dark aura affects her. They walk a few meters in a dark alley until they reach a small, 2-story apartment. Dio was about to carry Diana like a princess and let go of her on the roof, but Diana did it herself by slowly floating to the top of the 2-story building. Dio jumped after her and found her sitting on the ground and leaning against a brick chimney. He went over to her and looked at her wounds. Whoever shot her was definitely a professional. They aimed at the small area of her torso that was less protected by her armor. Do you want to tell me what's going on while I play doctor? Dio said it jokingly and approached her wound. It's not a very long story, Diana said while he pulled the bullet from her torso. It seems that the controlled ETA didn't lie about everything. Steve did come to this city to investigate reports of a new metahuman causing trouble for the local authorities. After arriving in the city and not answering ARGUS calls for a while, Diana was worried about her boyfriend and took off as soon as ETA told her about the mission. She easily found Steve, who welcomed her with open arms until he pulled out a gun and shot her at point-blank range. Then it was complete chaos. A bunch of ordinary people started to come in and try to capture her. It was only after a long struggle that Diana managed to escape. However, when she stepped out into the street, the metahuman led an army of commoners. Diana stopped her story and made an effort not to scream when he removed the bullet from her body. What's this metahuman like? Dio asked and focused his attention on her shoulder wound. I've never seen him before. He was small, had a big head, and wore a strange tiara. Diana said after the pain subsided a bit. Dio doesn't recognize or remember anyone with these powers based on these details alone. DC's list of telepaths is long, and he could also be a different version of a clearly psychic villain. Luckily, both she and Dio have some defenses against mind control. And what brought you here alone? Diana asked, and she was already appearing to be in better shape. ETA showed up at the Titan Tower and said you asked for my help. I realized she was being controlled almost at the same moment. We landed in a field near the city. Don't worry, she's not hurt. She'll just be very angry when she wakes up and realizes she's trapped on a jet. I didn't know she had come to the city too. I spent half my time here trying to escape my pursuers. These wounds are very strange, Diana told him. I agree. Diana's gunshot wounds shouldn't be making her move so slowly or making her as weak as they are now. But even though blades can hurt demigods, their bodies are much stronger than an average person's. That means they can still show their full power even when they are hurt until their bodies are almost completely destroyed. Then something crossed his mind. Dio held both bullets in his hand, stained with Diana's blood, and brought them close to his nose. Chapter 65, Chapter 64. This explains a lot, Dio said. What did you sense? Diana asked curiously. Aside from the scent of your blood and metal, one of the bullets smells like a chemical, probably the one Steve fired. Poison. Likely. A healing factor like hers provides incredible immunity against poisons and toxins. A poison that affects her as it's doing now is not a simple matter. Can your magic help? We have to save Steve and the city. No need. Now that I've removed the bullets, it won't take long for you to heal, and the toxin will leave your body. We can wait. She's not the type to wait when she has the chance to act. When she tried to get up, Dio put his hand on her shoulder and forced her to sit back down. Dio ignored the annoyed look she was giving him now and sat beside her. So, how's the new team going? Diana asked while trying to pass the time and giving up on acting immediately. We just got a new member, and you'll like her. She. Great, that sausage fest needed more estrogen. Diana joked. How do you know what a sausage fest is? Dio asked with curiosity. I spent some time at a university and wanted to learn more about your people's customs. Diana explained. You picked one of the worst places possible. Yeah, I realized that at one of their parties within the first few hours. Diana agreed while laughing. Now, why don't you tell me how you met your new friend? Dio told her about the mission in Casnia, but to his surprise, her next comment wasn't about the underground fight. It was the first time you saw a battlefield. It must have been quite frustrating, wasn't it? Diana asked. Yes, I couldn't do anything to help those people. Dio agreed with her. It was the same with me when I saw the trenches in Germany. I still imagine myself doing more in that war. Seriously, Diana, you and the Justice League of America practically won the war and saved thousands of lives. That's one of the burdens every hero carries, Dio. Your conscience will always haunt you with the idea that you could have done more. It's hard to learn the harsh truth that you can't save everyone. Dio fell silent while digesting what she had told him and looked at the full moon in the sky. I'm not so naive as to think I can save the whole world, but hearing that from the most powerful woman on earth carries a certain weight. If she can't save everyone, I will be much worse. That's what I truly think, and I can't do anything against this thought except strengthen myself. How are you? Dio asked. It's been half an hour since he removed the bullets. I am completely recovered. Diana responded with a smile as she stood up. Dio looks at the streets and sees that the activity has increased significantly. Earlier, the controlled people were pretending to be normal, but now they've stopped caring about that. They were walking on the streets with weapons in hand and were ready for a fight. They were probably just pretending to trick Dio because the metahuman couldn't control him. How are we going to do this? Dio asked her while still looking at the puppets below. Diana remained silent for a few seconds before responding. Steve and the Meta are in City Hall. It's time to deal with this madness. I've got a plan. Let me guess, you'll attack directly while I come in from behind and hit the boss on the head. If that fails, we'll run away with your boyfriend. Dio asked sarcastically. Exactly. Any problem? Diana asked after seeing his expression. How do I answer this without sounding like an idiot? Well, Diana, you know I consider you one of the greatest warriors in the world, but your plans are always simple at first. You only develop them during the fight, which is not a problem when you're fighting alone, but now. Batman told me something similar when I expressed my desire to fight alongside him. You're spending too much time with him. Diana interrupted him. Dio contained a genuinely happy smile for being slightly similar to one of his favorite heroes and responded. I only see him for a few seconds in days or weeks. No, I'm not seeing Batman too much. I'm just giving my opinion. If my plan doesn't please you, then tell me yours. Diana requested. Dio took the situation seriously and fell silent while thinking for a few seconds. First, is your communicator working? Dio asked, even though he knew the answer. No, the metahuman must be using some kind of signal jammer. Diana responded. I needed to ask, but since she hasn't asked for help until now, the answer is obvious. They still don't know that I'm with you, so let's use that. Dio said. What do you mean? Diana asked. Instead of you, it will be me who starts the front attack by shouting and yelling for you. Then you will take advantage of that by going from behind. It's not easy to catch a telepath off guard, so I'll use one of my tricks, but it has to be on my signal. A few psychics can see through the eyes of those they're controlling. Dio doesn't know the skill level of the idiot responsible for this mess, but he can't rule out this possibility since he certainly has the necessary brute strength. That's my plan, Dio. Diana said it seriously to him. I have improved it, so it is not the same as before. Dio replied with a smile. Diana sighed and nodded her head in agreement. Dio turned to go down, but just as he was about to go down, an idea crossed his mind, which caused him to look back at her. This wasn't one of your tests, was it? Dio asked. What do you mean? A test to measure my ability to create strategies or something like that. Dio explained further. Of course not. Diana responded with a serious expression. Dio turned back to the front, and he swore to all the gods that he felt the smile she gave behind his back. Dio looked at her again, just to see Diana's smile disappear, and her face returned to its serious expression. What's the matter? Diana asked. I remembered something. Are we invulnerable to mind control, or do we have some resistance? Dio asked and ignored the smile. This is an important question. A powerful telepath becomes more dangerous at close range. If Dio and Diana are the only ones who can stop them, they might be able to control their actions or at least figure out what they are thinking, and if that's the case, the whole plan is futile. So, if demigods don't have natural resistance, how couldn't he control me on the way here? Dio asked while trying to understand. I don't have it, but you can. That's what Martian Manhunter said. Diana told him. I've never met Martian Manhunter. Batman called him to examine your mind when you went into a coma the moment you awakened your powers. But Martian Manhunter couldn't even enter your mind. He described it as a black hole. Dio will ignore the fact that no one told him about this until now. It's not the time for that, and it also raises the question of what else Batman discovered about him while he was in a coma. Now they have work to do, and there's no time to think about it. In addition, it's good news. If not even the most powerful telepath in the world can read his mind, the idiot responsible for all this mess surely won't be able to do anything to him. They walked to the ground and stayed close so his ability could conceal their presence, but it wasn't really necessary. Diana moved very smoothly through the shadows and avoided all the patrols, which was something Dio had never seen her do before. As they got closer to the city center, where the town hall was located, the number of armed people searching for them began to increase. Still, they managed to keep walking at their own speed without being noticed. When they were just a block away from our destination, they split up. Diana would take a detour and wait for the right moment. But they had to be quick. As soon as the battle started, the leader would call all these scattered people from around the city, and an army would surround them. Finally, Dio arrived at the town hall. The building was quite large, 3 stories high, with a long white staircase leading up to the entrance. The place was well lit with a lot of people. There were at least 40 armed people scattered on the stairs while waiting for him. What mattered was that it got people's attention, which was the whole point. Dio jumped out of a small alley, crossed the main road, and landed right in front of the stairs with that spirit in mind. Blam! Wonder Woman! Dio yelled at the top of his lungs. Where are you? He shouted again. Chapter 66. Chapter 65. Bam! 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 Of course, those who are controlled didn't feel a thing about his entrance and started shooting. Naturally, Dio was prepared. He put his shield in front of his body, protecting himself from the shots. Dio stayed like that for a few seconds until he made a sudden move, with his shield raised, and found himself in front of the first shooter, who was at the front of the group. Dio moved his shield, hit his body from the side, and sent him flying to the left. The enemy fell down the stairs and rolled down, and Dio continued his attack. As Dio lowered his shield, he was vulnerable, but he could clearly see a bullet coming from a shotgun fired by a blonde woman right in front of his eyes. Dio moved his face to the side, and the bullet grazed his cheek. Dio advanced, grabbed the shotgun from the woman's hands, and then tripped her, which made her fall down the stairs as well. Trum! Dio shielded himself from the sound he despised in the middle of the rain of bullets fired at him. The sound of a .12 gauge shotgun. It fires a bunch of small metal balls that fly apart, which is different from other ammunition. They are not like other bullets that are easy to avoid, deflect, or defend against. The ones Dio hated being taught to avoid the most were the 12-gauge ones. Seeing the tiny bullets coming his way, he used the shadow movement to appear in front of the chubby man who had just fired the shot. Dio made him fall to the ground unconscious when he slapped him in the face to calm him down a bit. The average person is not as strong as a being with superpowers. Dio was really holding back as much as he could. They still get thrown around every time Dio hits them. It's always a concern when fighting ordinary humans. They fly far away if Dio hits even a little harder than he is now, so he needs to calculate where and how they'll land. They will definitely die or get seriously hurt if they hit their heads. Wonder Woman! Dio shouted again for the show to continue. From Dio's point of view, his actions may have seemed a little slow, but to ordinary people who didn't have powers, he moved very quickly. As a result of their different views of time, it took them a moment to realize that Dio was no longer in front of them but higher up on the left side of the staircase. When they refocused on him, Dio jumped and landed right in the center of the small group, then punched the ground. Bloom! Dio's strength created a small shockwave that shattered the ground and made them tumble. A lot of people fell down the stairs, and some of them were left dazed on the ground. Wonder Woman, where are you? Dio shouted as he got up. Trum! Suddenly, the glass doors of the town hall swung open abruptly, and another group of controlled people rushed towards him. This group wasn't armed. Most of them were holding pieces of wood and iron. Before they could get closer, Dio threw his gray shield at them. The shield spun and hit several of them in the head before breaking through the glass doors and disappearing into the building. Then Dio teleported into the group of those still standing without his shield. Dio knocked on all of them with quick, controlled blows, targeting their legs, ears, chest, and nose. The blows were all quick and accurate, and 20 people were left on the ground around him. Bam! 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 Those who remained on the stairs opened fire on Dio again. He quickly drew his sword and used it to split all the bullets in half and redirect others with small movements of his arm. Επικαλούμε το κρύο της λήψης του ποταμού και ως αιτίες. I summoned the cold of the river Cocytus. A black mist emanated from his sword and quickly filled the area. The people who were being controlled lost control of everything metal, especially weapons. Their hands froze so hard that they fell to the ground in pain. I overdid it. Dio spoke aloud and looked at the frozen scene. Trum! What in the fuck noise is this? A man shouted from the 3rd floor of the town hall. It was impossible for Dio to see him, but he could hear him. He began floating out of the window and slowly approached him. The reason he hadn't seen him was because the man was so small that he was hidden. The man was wearing an all-black suit with a blue tie and was slightly over a meter tall. His fine black hair was loose and looked like a lion's mane. He had a thin goatee around his mouth and black eyes. His head was slightly larger than his body, and on top of it was a peculiar-looking silver tiara.
"Who the heck dares to interrupt my slumber?" The man shouted again and looked at the scattered confusion on the ground. Dio conjured his shield back and held it in his free hand, with his sword already in his other hand.
"Hey, shorty, where's Wonder Woman?" Dio asked and taunted him. A little insult from a little sidekick. The man responded and looked at him with disdain. This really lowered the bar. Dio never fought alongside Diana, but after his invasion debut, he knows a lot of people view him as her sidekick. It might seem silly, but it bothers him when someone calls him that, even though he has never been her actual partner. "Where's Wonder Woman?" Dio asked again and tried to pretend to be as concerned as he could.
"Do you believe that I would be going to all this trouble to find you, you idiot, if I were carrying her with me?"
"You took your sweet time. I was waiting for you, you freak." The man continued. "Freak?" Dio asked in confusion. "How should I describe a mind like yours? If your mind weren't an endless black hole, I wouldn't have had so much trouble bringing you here without being controlled. In fact, the original plan was to bring all of you Titans under my control." The man explained his plan. "Do all telepaths see my mind in the same way?"
"Doesn't matter. I'll do it the old-fashioned way and capture you by force. Then the princess won't have a choice but to come to your rescue, and I'll capture her too while tying her up with that beautiful shiny lasso of hers."
Is he serious? I know I'll regret asking, but why all this interest in Wonder Woman?
"I know you've never met before,"
Dio asked. "I will be the emperor of the world, and everyone will be under my control, and a future emperor should have a woman worthy of him at his feet."
"That's where she belongs,"
the man replied without showing any shame in what he said. Is this guy really serious?
"It deeply irritates me to always see her all-powerful on TV, so now that I have the chance, I'm going to put her where every woman should be, at the feet of a powerful man."
The man continued. "My first supervillain, and he's a misogynist. Why couldn't it have been the Joker? He's a much bigger idiot, but at least he says this kind of thing out loud. I'm really trying not to get annoyed with what you just said. I'll just capture you." Dio decided. As the man said, Dio's mind was a black hole even from this distance, so he didn't need to be cautious about being controlled. Diana will be the secret weapon, and Dio will go all out right from the start. Another child who doesn't understand the superiority of being born as a man. The man continued spewing nonsense. "Seriously, dude, shut up." Dio shouted and jumped towards him with his sword raised. Dio aimed for his shoulder. I know this is harsh to do right away, but he's stupid. But when the sword was about to hit, Dio's body froze in mid-air. This lovely contraption on my head not only enhances my telepathy but also adds a bit of telekinesis to the mix. The man said this while moving his hand, and Dio was thrown down again. Dio rolled on the ground and got up just in time to see a bullet heading towards his chest. Dio raised his sword with the blade sideways, and changed the bullet's course, sending it high to his left. He forgot that there were still civilians being controlled nearby while he was talking, and more of them started coming from the city. The good news is that on the rooftop of the town hall, Dio saw a glint of light that caught my attention. It was the signal. Diana was in position and ready to attack at his signal. Chapter 67. Chapter 66. Diana was prepared, but Dio was not. Dio could give the order now, but he was sure she wouldn't be able to catch the fool by surprise. Dio will have to give him more trouble and keep him so focused on him that he forgets everything around him, which would give her a chance to appear and attack him unexpectedly. It shouldn't be too difficult. A fool like him probably thinks that a woman can't surprise him or some such ridiculous idea. Vrum. The fool used his telekinesis to lift a stone bench high above the town hall and throw it at Dio. Dio twisted his body to the side, which passed by him, but it was a mistake. The bench is now dangerously close to hitting one of the controlled people below. In the blink of an eye, Dio was in front of it and shielded the stone bench with his shield, which shattered it into small pieces that were scattered forward. The largest piece stops just inches from the fool's body, which is now floating and ready to send the piece flying back at Dio. Dio was about to do the same thing to the broken bench as he did to the whole one, and he used his shield when he was grabbed from behind by the neck. It's the one Dio saved a few seconds ago, and now he's causing him trouble. Seeing the stone coming at Dio fast, he moved his body backward and kicked it like a soccer ball, which sent it high into the air. Dio also gave a backward head but to free himself. Then he turned and hit the one he saved earlier and broke his nose as he was sent tumbling back down. A hero hurting ordinary people, how sad. The fool said. What's your name again? Dio asked while sending the two more civilians tumbling down the stairs. Oh right. I didn't introduce myself properly. I am Dr. Edgar Sisko. The fool replied proudly.
With his height, power, and the fact that he is a misogynist, I remember who he is. You can call me Dr. Psycho. Dio said out loud and looked at him. The fool's reaction is expected. He clenched his jaw, a vein throbs on his forehead, and then he closed his fists, screaming with force. Don't call me that. It might not have been a good idea to make him mad, but Dio didn't recall that he had a problem with the name given to him in the comics. Dio usually doesn't mind making his enemies angry, but this idiot unleashed a telekinetic wave that destroyed the stairs, which created a path through them. Before Dio can think of escaping, the invisible wave hits his body. This much telekinetic force hitting him is a strange feeling. It's like running full speed in one direction, and all of a sudden, there's a wall in front of him. When he hits the wall with telekinesis, it's like the wall is moving while his body stays still. Dio's body tumbles through the air until it hits something. Blam! Dio fall on his back onto a pickup truck, which created a dent. Ha! When Dio stood up, he felt pain in the front of his body. He wiped his face and saw that it was his own blood coming out of his nose. Bring him to me. I want to teach him respect. Dio heard Dr. Psycho's voice, a bit distant now. Dio was thrown to the other side of the street, which is not a great place to be right now. It's beginning to fill with controlled people. Seeing the wave of people coming from both the right and left, Dio's patience decreases. Enough of this! Dio shouted as he left the rooftop of the car and walked back to the ground. In the middle of the street, Dio thrust his sword into the ground, placed his hand on its pommel with his closed eyes, and uttering the words, Afxisi. Rise. As Dio mentioned several times before, it's a lot waste of energy to summon an entire skeleton to fight with him. In addition to the energy needed to summon them, they still use energy while they are on this plane. They are also not very smart. They can only follow simple orders. Dio practiced and tried to improve his summoning spell because he knew that it would come in handy one day. Moreover, these disadvantages only happen because his energy is limited, but that will change over time. Thus, Dio was technically playing a long game. The asphalt is engulfed in a black smoke that originates from his sword on the ground. There are 6 skeletons rising from the smoke that has grown 4 meters around him. These skeletons are white and pristine, and the only sign of life in them is the red energy that burns like flames in their eyes. The skeletons are unarmed, but they shouldn't be underestimated. The hardness of their bones is much greater than that of an ordinary human, but their weakness at the joints is still a serious concern. Their strength also equals that of an adult. Stop them but do not kill them. Dio gave the order. They split into 2 groups of 3 and head in different directions. BLM. Dio soon hear the sound of gunfire as the civilians open fire on his skeletons. However, the bullets do not hit them. It's very hard to hit something that has no flesh, and these civilians have received no firearms training. The skeletons can take a gunshot without feeling any pain because their bones are stronger than human bones. The only way to stop them is by destroying their skulls or scattering their bones, but unfortunately, the controlled civilians are unaware of this. The skeletons reach the groups of controlled people. They open their arms and crash into them, which causes several to fall to the ground. They also disarm the people and hit them with their own weapons. However, none of the controlled people cross the line. Still, Dio has to keep a close eye on them in case an accident happens. Dio doesn't want to indirectly become a killer because of them. What the hell are these things? Dr. Psycho exclaimed and looked at Dio's summons. Dio used the fact that his black-bladed sword was still on the ground to his advantage while the opponent looked at his skeletons. Dio let the black mist continue to expand until it's under Dr. Psycho's body. From the mist, 4 white skeleton arms emerge and grasp him from above. These arms are different as they can stretch to reach their target. With all 4 hands, they hold Dr. Psycho's small body in the air, where he starts to move around. Let me go! Dr. Psycho shouted. Dr. Psycho was so surprised that he forgot to use his powers. Seizing the chance, Dio jumped with all his strength toward him after picking up his sword from the ground. When Dr. Psycho sees him coming closer, he remembers his powers and breaks all the arms, which sends Dio flying backward again. However, Dio was expecting this. Dio twists his body while he is in the air and moves away from him but still goes straight toward him. When Dio was about to throw his shield, he spoke softly. Επικαλούμε τη βασιλιά του βασιλιά Λίθητα. I summon the King Lethe's forgetfulness. A milky white energy covered his shield, which erased it from existence. When Dio throws it, which doesn't exist for anyone for just a second, it crosses all the way to Dr. Psycho's head. Then the magic disappears and from his point of view, the shield must have suddenly appeared in front of his head. In his panic, Dr. Psycho couldn't defend himself, and the shield precisely hit the silver tiara of Dr. Psycho. Trum! He wasn't expecting sparks to fly off of his gear, and Dr. Psycho is still in the air. At that moment, Dio looked to the roof of the town hall in front and subtly nodded his head. Diana didn't miss the cue.
She flew like a rocket to reach to them and wrapped her shining golden lasso around Dr. Psycho, landing just a few meters away from him. She wasn't done yet. She put force on Dr. Psycho by holding the lasso in both hands and spinning him around her in a circle until Diana pulled the lasso up and then down. Boom! When Dr. Psycho's small body hit the ground, it almost made Dio feel sorry for him, but that feeling quickly passed. Good job. Diana congratulated Dio as she approached, still holding her lasso. Thank you. Dio replied, but it wasn't looking at her. Instead, he was focused on those who had been controlled. The people seemed to have passed out when Dio destroyed the device. He needed to check their condition. Before that, the last 4 skeletons were pulled into the black mist at their feet and disappeared from this plane. How are they? Diana asked and stood beside the unconscious Dr. Psycho. Dio approached one of the controlled people on the ground, knelt down, and placed his fingers on his neck. After confirming their pulse, Dio conducted a brief examination. Dio was no expert, but he was clearly responding to stimuli, but they remained unconscious. For some reason they won't wake up. Dio said to Diana as I stood up. I'll fly out of the blocker's range and request help from the League. Johns will know what to do with them. Diana said. I shouldn't have destroyed the device. Dio said while blaming himself. I would have done the same. Diana reassured him. Dio looked at Dr. Psycho, who was still unconscious on the ground. Before asking for Martian Manhunter's help, why don't we ask the responsible one directly? Dio said and approached him. Ksipna. Wake up. What? Where? What? Dr. Psycho shouted while writhing on the ground. Diana used her lasso to force him to sit on the ground. It's you. Dr. Psycho shouted when he noticed her. Yes, it's me. Diana replied. Dr. Psycho. Dio started. I told you not to call me that, you idiot. Dr. Psycho shouted and looked at him. Then just Doctor. Dio tried again. Doctor is acceptable. Dr. Psycho said. Then looked at Diana. Well, it seems I failed, but it doesn't matter. In the future, I'll have more chances to put you in your place. Snap. Ouch. Dr. Psycho yelled when Dio slapped his face. I think I used too much force, as my fingers were red where they had left marks on his face. Giddix. Diana yelled at Dio. Sorry. Wonder Woman. I lost my patience for a few seconds. You're not picking up Batman's bad habits, are you? We don't torture. That's not how I taught you. Diana raised her voice at him. It was one of the rare times she got angry with him. Chapter 68. Chapter 67. I'm sorry. I promise that I won't do it again. Dio apologizes once more. This time sincerely. Yet another man was tamed by a woman. How pathetic. Dr. Psycho didn't help with his words, but this time Dio stopped himself from hitting him. That's enough. Diana said angrily. Hestia's lasso compels you to tell the truth. Answer our questions. Diana shouted, which gave another tug on the lasso. As if understanding Diana's words, the radiant golden lasso shone even brighter. Are these people seriously hurt? Diana asked and looked at the civilians on the ground. Dr. Psycho is now struggling not to answer, but with each passing second he resists, the lasso shines more brightly, and in the end, he yields. No. Dr. Psycho finally answers with a shout. So why won't they wake up? Diana asks the question again. Their minds have been turned off. It takes a decent telepath to wake them up. Dr. Psycho answered, this time more quickly. Where is Steve Trevor? Diana asked next. He's not here anymore. Dr. Psycho shouted. Where is he? Diana asked again. Once more, Dr. Psycho doesn't answer and tries to resist Lasso's magic. The amount of sweat on his face shows that he won't be able to resist for long. Answer! Diana shouted and gave another tug on the lasso around his body. I handed him over to complete the deal. Dr. Psycho gives in. What deal? Dio asked with confusion. The deal I made to get the drug I used in the bullet to weaken her was giving them Steve Trevor after taking control of him. But now that I've broken your device, Steve must already be out of your control, and he was somewhere. Dio said. No, I didn't give him to them while under control. Instead, I used hypnosis to keep him under control. It was one of the conditions of the deal. Dr. Psycho explained. That was clever. Whoever it is predicted his defeat. Who are they? Diana asked. I don't know. I only know that they are part of an organization whose name I don't know. They introduced themselves as the Poison. Bang! 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 Soon after he finished speaking, 4 shots were fired in 4 different directions. But they were unusually quiet compared to regular gunfire due to the use of silencers. They were ready for their super hearing, but the city was in complete silence because its entire population was now asleep on the ground. They were both already looking for them as the bullets made noise as they left the gun barrels. The shots at Dr. Psycho came from the left, the right, the front, and the back, and they were all aimed at a vital part of him. Dio was closer to the bullet that was aimed at his forehead, so he pulled out his sword and changed the trajectory of the bullet before it hit him. Dio raised his shield in front of the bullet coming from the left to protect himself. Diana had an even easier time. The bullet that came from the right hit her bracelet, and then she turned around to hit the bullet that came from behind, easily stopping both threats. "You take 2, and I'll take the other 2. Dio said while getting up and eager to hunt down the snipers. "Wait!" Diana shouted, and when Dio turned to find out why, he saw Dr. Psycho on the ground. "What happened?" Dio asked. "Look at his neck," Diana replied. Dio moved his body to the side and saw a small dart embedded in his neck. He removed it, and he doesn't even need to get close to it to know he's been poisoned. Whoever did this pulled off a brilliant move. The 4 shots were distractions. The real attack came through a gun, an archaic weapon that has a silencer, and a standard gun can be fired from up to 25 meters away. A professional could shoot from even further. "Can you heal him?" Diana asks while bending down and laying him face up on the ground. In the few seconds since he was hit, his condition has worsened rapidly. He's now foaming at the mouth. "Put him on his side so he doesn't choke." Dio instructs first, and Diana complies. "I technically have a healing spell, but it's very unpleasant, and I've never tested it on anyone," Dio said. "If we don't do something, he'll definitely die." "Try it now," Diana insisted. "Very well," Dio responded. Dio held Dr. Psycho's chin and straightened his head, then applied a bit of pressure to open his mouth. Dio places his free hand just above his mouth and aims at his throat. "Επικαλέστηκα τη τιμωρία του ποταμού Phlegethon. I summoned the punishment of the river Phlegethon." As Dio mentioned before, he has no talent for healing mystical arts, but this spell comes close. There are many rivers in the Underworld, but the Phlegethon River is one of the best healing. It can bring even damaged souls back to their original state. But it was made to punish people like everything else in the Underworld. The surprise with the Phlegethon River is that its waters are like liquid fire. It's literally a river of fire. The idea is quite simple. Let's heal the sinner so they can even more suffer, but why not hurt them while they're being healed? The water from the Phlegethon River will heal anyone, but it will hurt as much as being burned alive. There are beliefs that souls that enter it will be burned and healed forever and will never be able to get out. That's why Zatanna classified this spell as a healing/attack, the first of its kind since the 2 branches are very separate. Of course, a light healing spell can be used to harm a creature, like an undead, but Dio's doesn't require the target to be a specific type of being to inflict damage. A drop appears below his hand, red as blood and glowing like magma, and it falls into Dr. Psycho's open mouth. The result was as expected. Dr. Psycho tried to scream in pain, but Dio closed his mouth so he wouldn't spit out the drop, as conjuring one was a huge effort. The pain on his face was clearly visible, and his body convulsed wildly on the ground, his legs kicking uncontrollably. Dio feels he punished him enough for his earlier words. The pain of having liquid fire go down his throat and then spread through his blood is punishment enough. In fact, Dio was starting to feel sorry for the poor man, who was now crying. After a minute of torment, which must have felt like hours to him, Dr. Psycho finally faints. In addition, it is interesting to know that the Phlegethon River doesn't allow those who use it to go unconscious. Otherwise, how could they feel the pain? "That seemed worse than I imagined," Diana remarked. She remained silent throughout the healing process. "I told you it's unpleasant. Is he healed now?" Dio conducted a quick examination of Dr. Psycho and said, "His breathing is stable, he'll be fine." "Great, wake him up. We need to find out where Steve was taken." "Aren't you going to track down the assassins?" Dio asked. "No, they started fleeing seconds after they fired," Diana replied. "Ξύπνα. Wake up." "Haawaia." When Dr. Psycho woke up, the good doctor screamed with all his might until he couldn't anymore. "Are you feeling okay?" Dio asked. "Please don't hurt me anymore. I'll tell you everything I know. I'll be a good boy," Dr. Psycho said while looking at Dio with fear in his eyes. "Now I'm feeling like a villain who tortured an innocent victim." "Where was Steve Trevor taken?" Diana asked Dr. Psycho, who was in tears. "I'm not entirely sure. The person who came to me for the deal was wearing a strange suit with psychic dampeners," Dr. Psycho explained with tears streaming down his face. "The device you used to enhance your powers and the drug you put in the bullet that hit me, did they come from the same person?" Diana continued. "Yes, they said I represented the ideal they defend, and they wanted to help me achieve greatness. He was clearly a pawn in an elaborate plan to kidnap Steve, but the question is why. Whoever is behind this is undoubtedly long gone, so finding them will be incredibly difficult. We can leave the signal-blocked zone, then ask for help from the League and the Titans. We can conduct a global search with 2 speedsters with us.
It shouldn't be impossible.
Dio suggested it to Diana. Flash can certainly search the entire globe in seconds, but from my own experience, organizations that operate like this are incredibly good at hiding. The chances of finding them that way are very slim. Diana explained it and rejected his plan, growing a bit colder. Is there another way, a location spell? But for that, I need unique materials. Dio suggested. What materials? Diana asked more eagerly. Something personal from Steve. The more personal, the better. It can be a highly sentimental item, or even better, something from his body. Dio explained. I've used this spell before to find Vanessa when those bastards nearly attacked her. Just thinking about it makes me want to go after them again and curse them once more. As for his suggestion, Dio wasn't confident in it. Dio got something from Vanessa by living with her. In this case, her hair. Diana smiled happily and reached into her chest when Dio finished talking. Chapter 69. Chapter 68.
Oh, Dr. Psycho, whom Dio had almost forgotten was here, looked at this scene with the eyes of a disgusting pervert.
I can hear your heart rate increasing. It's possible that the poison is still in your body. It's better to do another round of healing, just to be sure. Dio said it with a smile. At that very moment, Dr. Psycho's face turned pale, and he began to sweat again. No, please, I beg you, I'm completely healed, please. Here. Diana exclaims in happiness and gives her palm to Dio. Dio ignored Dr. Psycho and looked at the item. It was a standard silver military dog tag with Steve's name and other information engraved on it. Steve used this dog tag every year he was in the military until he gave it to me as a good luck charm.
I've carried it with me ever since.
Diana explains. An item that the person has carried for a long time has great mystical significance. It's as if the item becomes a part of the user's body, and it becomes even more important if the user feels that the item is somehow special and brings them luck. Now we just need a world map. Diana quickly went to a nearby convenience store and returned with a map, laying it out on the ground. Dio went to it and held the dog tag above it, then said the words.
Στο όνομα όλων των θεών, δείξε μου τι ψάχνω. In the name of all the gods, show me what I seek.
Dio's hand ignited in flames and burned the dog tag until it disappeared. Then, a point on the map started to light up and quickly went out, leaving behind only a black dot. Diana, this location. Yes, it's the ARGUS headquarters. Diana confirmed. The world map is larger than a city map, and since Dio only has an item used by Steve, the result could have been anywhere in the middle of the United States, which wouldn't have been very helpful. Luckily, the ARGUS headquarters is at one end of the map.
We have to go there now.
Dio said it urgently.
Diana agreed and stood by his side, then held his body ready to fly. Wait, what about him?
Dio asked while looking at Dr. Psycho, who was still on the ground and tied up with the lasso of truth.
We'll take him with us, of course. Diana replied and then flew into the air.
When Diana said, take him, she actually meant, drag him. One end of her lasso was tied to her waist, and the other end was stretched with Dr. Psycho hanging from it. It wasn't a comfortable experience for him, as he screamed and yelled like a madman while being pulled through the air. Once they left the city, the signal returned, and Diana was able to contact the League. The majority of members were busy with their own tasks, but luckily, the Martian Manhunter was free and on his way to the city to help wake everyone up. The Titan Tower was also alerted, and they will join in with the Martian Manhunter. ARGUS isn't a secret organization, but it's not widely known, and due to the dangerous things it deals with in its missions, the security level of its headquarters is very strict. Diana has free access that extends to him, and the reason she wants to avoid reinforcements is political. The person who wants to be Steve's replacement as director is currently doing several things against him without his knowledge. If an unauthorized person enters ARGUS, it will provide firearms for this individual. They had already passed that point, but Dio knew that she would definitely request help if things got out of control. Diana is too responsible and generous not to do that. As they approached their destination, Diana suddenly increased her speed. Dio couldn't blame her, as he could also see the black smoke on the horizon. They finally arrived at the massive 10-story military-looking building built on a cliff overlooking the sea. On its rooftop, where the small hangar is located, there was chaos. Diana landed, and Dio looked in all directions for survivors. This place used to be full of ARGUS jets and helicopters, all of which were now destroyed in flames.
Great Hera!
Diana exclaimed, a little saddened.
There are no casualties up here, Diana.
Dio said to cheer her up.
In the hangar, there were usually many mechanics and soldiers who took care of these aircraft.
Dio couldn't see or sense any of them here, either alive or dead, which was a good sign. They must have retreated when the attack began.
Diana guessed. Please. A voice shouted behind them. It was Dr. Psycho.
Dio had forgotten about him again as soon as he saw the smoke, and Diana did the same because his landing was not very gentle.
Dr. Psycho's whole body was covered in dust, and his face was scratched and bleeding, but not too seriously. Please untie me. Dr. Psycho continued. Do you want me to heal your injuries? Dio asked mockingly.
Dr. Psycho's face immediately turned even paler, and he fell silent.
Let's leave him tied up here. It will be too much trouble to take him with us, Dio told Diana, and she agreed.
Diana dragged him across the ground, holding her lasso, and tied him to a lamppost with his back against it. She then picked up a piece of metal from the ground and after removing her lasso from his body, she twisted the piece of metal around him to secure him to the lamppost.
That should be enough,
Diana said, looking at her handiwork and then turning away without caring about Dr. Psycho.
Let's go, Diana said, then took her sword and shield from her back and waist.
Diana uses her weapons when necessary, and now she's literally saying she'll use them regardless of the situation inside.
Dio followed her to the entrance because he knew it was not the right time to talk.
The 3-meter-tall metal doors were closed, which made it more likely that ARGUS personnel were locked up inside the building when the attack started.
Boom! Boom! Boom!
Diana needed 3 punches with her fist to dent and bring down the incredibly resilient metal doors, which revealed the interior of the facility.
She didn't move the door. Instead, she stood there and looked at the entrance.
Dio approached and looked over her shoulder to see a horrifying scene.
The bodies of several ARGUS personnel were spread out on the ground. Chapter 70. Chapter 69. The strong smell of blood and gunpowder almost made Dio vomit.
Dio quickly closed his senses, and that's the only reason he managed to hold it in. Then, it was the images in front of him that turned his stomach. He had seen bodies before. The first time was during the invasion, but the bodies in front of him were destroyed on another level of brutality. They are spread out on the floor in different places, and there is an inch of blood on the ground and all over the walls, which makes it look like a gruesome piece of art. These are all the bodies of mechanics and engineers who were wearing coveralls. They suffered a variety of wounds, but blasts killed the majority of them, which crushed their heads and completely destroying their bodies. A number of others were shot, but the shots were not only meant to kill but also to target very specifically. One of the bodies has a lot of holes in it.
Great Hera! Diana exclaims in front of Dio.
She had seen a lot of wars, but seeing her comrades being torn apart on the ground still hurt her deeply.
Diana, look to the left, Dio said after seeing the tragedy in front of him.
Turning left after the bodies, he can see some bloodstains going in that direction.
Survivors, Diana said.
Yes, I think they're heading for the bunker,
Dio assumed.
They have a safe room on the lowest floor of the building to protect themselves from attacks by metahumans since they work with metahumans and help heroes. With nothing more to say, Diana hovers above the blood and goes to the left. Dio followed, then leaped over the blood and ran to catch up with her. They quickly found more bodies to the left, and they all died in the same unusual way as the ones at the entrance. There was someone breathing up ahead,
Diana said after taking the stairs down 1 floor because the elevators were broken. They reach the corridor and see a soldier from the ARGUS with his back to them. Soldier, Diana called. The soldier turns and faces them.
The organization's battle suit covers his whole body like gray armor, and there is a red circle on his chest that is where the suit's energy core is located, making the wearer stronger and more defensive. The soldier is also using a long silver weapon, something not available on the commercial market, an energy weapon. Due to the helmet with a red visor, they couldn't see his face very well, but he didn't appear to be injured, with a bit of blood on his left leg. That's when things got strange. The soldier who should have been their ally fired his weapon at Diana. A short blue energy beam shot the short distance almost instantly. Dio didn't know why, but Diana managed to raise her arm, and the energy beam hit her bracelet, which reflected and left a hole in the wall next to her. Dio moved in front of Diana and stood in front of the soldier before he could fire again. He grabbed his weapon and raised it into the air.
He fired, and the shot hit the lighting, which caused it to explode.
Then, Dio grabbed the side of his helmet and slammed it against the wall, which shattered the helmet, and the soldier fell to the ground unconscious.
Dio looked at Diana and saw that she was fine.
That was dangerous. Energy weapons are extremely dangerous due to their speed and penetrating power. Dio could only see a flash after the shot. He certainly wouldn't have been able to dodge it if he were the target. However, Diana must have found it fairly easy given her experience and abilities.
A traitor? Diana asked while approaching the fallen soldier.
I don't know, Dio replied while crouching down and removing what was left of the damaged helmet. The side of the soldier's head was bleeding, and his eyes were alarmingly green. It was an unusual sight, and he was clearly under the influence of something bad. Do you have any idea what could have caused this? Dio asked and turned to see Diana's angry face.
Yes, I do.
Diana replied with gloom. Diana also approached and looked at the soldier. She seemed to want to be absolutely sure before telling him.
It's Maru's virus for sure.
Diana explained.
Maru?
Dio asked with confusion. Dio doesn't recall ever hearing that name, and Diana gave him a brief lesson on poisons that affect demigods during his training, but he doesn't remember this one. The first time I encountered it was when I returned to the world of men with Steve. A cult that worshipped Ares but was actually under the control of his children used it. In this reality, after Diana helped win World War II, she returned to Themyscira and stayed there until Steve's plane crashed.
What are its effects?
Dio asked. The infected go into a state of madness and attack anyone in their surroundings until the virus kills them or someone intervenes to stop them. Diana explained with disgust while removing her golden lasso from her hip. But unlike the infected I've encountered before, this one seems to be in a worse state.
We can only pray that this works,
Diana said as she wrapped the golden lasso around the man's neck. The lasso glowed a little brighter, and then the soldier's eyes began to return to normal, and his appearance improved slightly. Those infected typically die after some time, but my lasso both before and now can save them from this torment. A virus that leaves people in a wild state for certain time causes destruction and death and then kills them. This is very dangerous, and according to her, the virus has improved. If her lasso can heal the infected, this virus must have something mystical in it because her lasso can't heal common diseases. Does this virus affect us? Dio asked with concern.
Not before,
Diana replied. That doesn't mean much now. Dio said. If the virus has been changed, there's a chance it could infect metahumans or even demigods. A terrifying image formed in his mind. Can anyone imagine how much damage someone infected with this virus would do if Superman or Diana couldn't be controlled? We need to move faster and save as many infected as we can. Diana said.
I agree.
They both ran through the halls and past more injured bodies as they went. The blood on the floor and walls made this headquarters turn into something out of a horror movie. After descending another flight of stairs, Diana opened the door leading to the floor below when a woman attacked her.
Diana held the woman by the arms and threw her against the wall.
Then she took the lasso from her waist and wrapped it around the woman's neck. A man in a dress shirt with green eyes and drooling came out of the door and tried to attack Diana from behind while she was taking the nightmare out of the woman. Dio stepped in front of him and tried to grab him. Dio moved faster and grabbed him below the collar of his shirt. He then put his leg next to his and twisted his body, which knocked him to the ground. But he tried to choke Dio, as that wasn't enough to stop the fight. Dio let go of his shirt and hit him in the face, which made him pass out.
Here. Diana said that and offered him the end of her golden lasso.
Dio quickly took it and wrapped it around the man's wrist. A few seconds later he was better, as was the woman. This won't work, it takes too long to heal one person. Dio told her and stood up. We don't have another option for now. Diana said. True, but as far as I remember, Dr. October's lab is on this floor. Dio reminded Diana, who soon understood. So they headed straight for Dr. October's personal lab, hoping she would be there and be okay. They ran through the corridors this time, passing by several bodies of scientists in blood-stained lab coats. When they reached the location, they received good indicators, as a man in ARGUS military armor was firing at the gray bulletproof glass door with 2 pistols. Diana walked up behind the man and wrapped the lasso around his neck with the skill of a hitman using a wire. With the enemy on the ground, Diana went up to the gray glass and tapped it with her hand. Are you there, Victoria? Diana asked while tapping the glass again.
It's me, Diana.
Victoria said.
Diana.
A voice exclaimed cheerfully from the other side of the glass at the same moment, and then the glass became transparent while revealing its interior. Once Dr. Victoria October was sure that they were allies, she entered her password into the glass, which opened and let us in. Dio pulled the healed soldier inside with him.